Welcome to Cosmic Wand. Today's adventure, a voice said, Hidden Dungeon, 1,000 floors and Harry cleared them all before first year. If you haven't already, smash that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss a story. Now, let's begin. Chapter 1. The cupboard has a door you haven't found. The clock in the hall struck 2, and Harry Potter, who was not asleep, decided that the spider above his face was the most interesting thing in England. It hung on a single thread from the underside of the stairs, turning very slowly, one way and then the other, as if it could not make up its mind about him. Harry watched it the way he watched most things in the cupboard, quietly, with his hands behind his head, and with the part of his mind that never quite switched off already working out how far it would have to drop before it reached his nose. 9 inches. Maybe 10. He'd have time to blow it off course. Upstairs, Dudley turned over and the whole ceiling groaned. Dust came down in a thin gray drift and settled on the blanket. Harry did not brush it away. If he lay very still, sometimes the house forgot he was in it, and forgetting was the closest thing to peace he was likely to get before morning, when Aunt Petunia would rap on the door with one knuckle and tell him there were eggs to fry, and he had better not burn them this time. He was thinking about the eggs, and about the spider, and about nothing at all, when the words arrived. They did not come through his ears. That was the strange thing, the thing he would try to explain to himself for weeks afterward and never manage. They arrived already inside his head, printed there in clean bright letters against the dark, as though someone had switched on a sign behind his eyes. Hello, Harry Potter. He sat up so fast he cracked his head on the low shelf and knocked down a tin of Aunt Petunia's spare buttons which he caught before it hit the floor on instinct, without looking. He held it against his chest and listened to his own pulse and to the ordinary sounds of the sleeping house, and there was nothing, nobody, only the spider swinging on its thread from where his movement had disturbed the air. You're tired, he told himself, very softly. You're just tired. You are tired, the words agreed, brightening. You are also correct that no one spoke. I am not a voice. Think of me as a door that learned to talk. Harry did not answer. He had learned early and thoroughly that answering things could be a mistake. Teachers, Dudley, Uncle Vernon's questions that were really traps with a hook in the middle. He pressed his back to the wall and drew his knees up and watched the empty air of the cupboard where, until a moment ago, there had been nothing at all. And now there was a faint silver seam, thin as a hair, running down the plaster from the ceiling to the floor. It had not been there that morning. He knew the whole cupboard the way he knew his own hands. He knew the crack shaped like a running dog above the door, and the water stain like a map of somewhere that didn't exist, and the place where the wood had swelled so the shelf sat crooked. He did not know this. The seam gave off a light that did not fall on anything. It lit no wall, cast no shadow of the buttons in his hands. It was simply there, and bright, and waiting. What you are looking at, said the system, has been looking at you for 10 years. It could not open. Warn't till you were old enough to survive the first floor. You are now old enough. Barely. Harry repeated. It was the first word he'd said aloud to it, and he regretted it at once, because saying it made the whole thing real, made him a person having a conversation instead of a person going quietly mad in a cupboard. Conjure operations are premature. Let me be clear about something, Harry Potter. Because the Then's brow will not be clear about anything. You have been offered a hidden dungeon. It has 1,000 floors. It will let in no one but you, not your aunt. Not your cousin, not the headmaster of the school you do not yet now you will attend. You, alone. That is the first rule and the kindest one. A new panel unfolded beneath the words, and this Harry could not look away from, because it was the first time in his life a thing had been addressed to him and only to him, with his name at the top of it like a letter. Hidden Dungeon, the 1,000 entrant Harry J. Potter. Floors cleared, 0/1000, current depth, surface. Warning. Descent is permit. Retreat is not revered. Retreat is not reward. Time below is not time above. That last line he read 3 times. Time below is not time above. He turned the tin of buttons over in his hands and thought about Aunt Petunia's knuckle on the door and the eggs, and understood, dimly, that whatever was down there, he might be able to come back up before anyone knew he had gone. How much time? He asked. Clever. That is the right question, and you esqued it second, which is Bettenspur. Ein horde above mays be a day begrove, or a week, or less. The dungeon decades. You will not starve. The floors feed the sklurs thinget and confit its courtierdom. You will not age faster than the body you bring. You will be tested, and some of the test bite. Harry looked at the seam of light. He was 10 years old and small for it, with knees that stuck out and glasses held together at one corner with a twist of tape, and he had spent every one of those years being told in 100 ways that he was nothing and would come to nothing and had better be grateful for the cupboard he was allowed to sleep in. He had never been offered anything. Not a birthday that meant it. Not a door. He put the tin of buttons down on the crooked shelf very carefully so it would not roll. What's on the first floor? He asked. Something small, said the system. So that you learn the schnall to set the shoe the run the shape of thens before the hens get learned. Put your hand on the seam. It will not hurt. The hurting comes later, and you will see it coming. Which is more than this world has ever given you. He should have been frightened. Later, turning it over, he would decide that some part of him had been frightened, in the ordinary animal way that his skin knew before his mind did. But louder than the fear was a thing he had no good name for. The feeling of a hell breath finally allowed to leave the chest. Someone had drawn a door in the one place in the world that belonged to him and told him it was his and only his, and that no one who had ever made him small could follow him through it. Harry reached out and put his palm flat against the light. The cupboard came apart around him like a reflection when a stone drops into it, and he fell, not down, exactly, but through, into the smell of wet stone and green growing things. And the door closed over the place where number 4, Privet Drive had been, and did not leave so much as a crack. The first floor was a hollow the size of Aunt Petunia's kitchen, lit by nothing he could point to. The walls were living rock, dark and slick, and threaded through with a pale moss that gave off a low green shine, enough to see by if he let his eyes settle. Water moved somewhere, patient and unhurried. The air was cool and smelled of the inside of a well. In the center of the floor stood a stone pedestal, and on the pedestal lay a knife. Floor 1 OF 1000, the system announced, the letters hanging in the dark. Beomore, the Underwarren. The first 200 floors belong to Bates. They do not reason. They are hungry in the honest way, and honesty, here, is the most dangerous thing of all. Harry crossed to the pedestal. The knife was plain, a hand's length of dull gray metal, a wrapped handle worn smooth, as if a great many hands had held it before his. When he closed his fingers around it, a new line printed itself into the air. Idem acquired, the Paring Cane Life. It is not much. It is enough. Attain that cuts. In the hand of someone wish, tinks, has ended larger things than you. That's encouraging, Harry said, and was surprised to find he meant it a little. I am not here to encourage you. I am here to keep the score. Now, listen. On this floor, there is one enemy. It is a Duskar rat, which is a point sick. Is a rat the size of a terrier with an opinion about your ankles. It will come from the water. It will come fast. You have until it arrives to deck it. Harry did not wait for it to come. That was the first thing the dungeon taught him about himself. Though he wouldn't have put it in those words, he did not like waiting for the trap to spring. He liked to be somewhere the trap wasn't. He looked at the water, a black seam of it running along the far wall, disappearing under the rock at both ends, and then he looked at the pedestal, which was the only high thing in the room, and he climbed it. It brought him 3 feet off the floor. Not much. Enough that a thing which came low and fast would have to change its plan to reach him, and things that come honestly, the system had said, are not good at changing plans. When the dusk rat came, it came exactly as promised. A surge of the black water, a scrabble of claws on wet stone, a low gray body flowing across the floor with its eyes lit dull red by the moss. It made for the place where a boy on the ground would have been. There was no boy on the ground. It checked, confused, its whiskers working, and in the half second it spent being confused, Harry dropped off the back of the pedestal, landed on the far side of it, and put the paring knife into the soft place behind its foreleg, where the ribs left off. The dusk rat screamed, a sound like a rusted hinge, and thrashed, and he let go of the knife rather than be dragged and rolled clear, and came up with his back to the wall, and his hands empty, and his heart going hard. It died slowly. He made himself watch, because looking away from a thing that was dying because of you seemed to him a kind of lie. Flow War 1 cleared, said the system, without warmth, without judgment. Time elapsed. Fornty war. You made I wait for you. I will remember that you fight that way. Is that good? It is a way. Good and bad are for later floors. Retrieve your cane life. A toll you leave in a corpse is a carpse, is a toll you have given to the dact. He retrieved his knife. His hands were not quite steady, and he despised that, and he breathed until they were standing over the gray, wet shape of the thing he had killed, 10 years old, in a cavern beneath a house that thought he was asleep. Then a stair opened in the far wall, a slot of deeper dark, with steps going down. And the moss light seemed to lean toward it, and Harry Potter went down to the second floor. He would not be able, afterward, to describe the first 200 floors in order. They ran together the way a hard week runs together, a blur of teeth and cold water, and the particular exhaustion of never once being allowed to be certain he was safe. But he remembered the shape of how he changed and the system, keeping its scrupulous, unfeeling score, remembered the rest. The early floors taught him the grammar of the place. Each was a single sealed room or a short run of connected chambers. Each held a beast, or two, or a nest. Each opened its stair only when the last living thing in it was no longer living, or once when the last living thing had been convinced there were better places to be. That was floor 19, and Harry was proud of floor 19 for a long time. Floor 19 held a pack of blind cavehounds, 6 of them, pale as things kept in jars, hunting by sound and smell in a chamber with a floor of loose scree that shifted and rattled under any weight. He understood within a minute that he could not fight 6 of anything. He was one small boy with a paring knife and a set of ribs he was fond of, so he did not fight them. He crouched at the entrance and studied the way they moved, always toward noise, always converging, and he found a fist-sized rock and he threw it hard against the far wall, and the whole pack broke toward the sound in a rattling scramble, and he threw a second the moment the first landed, further along, hurting them, and a third, and by the time the hounds worked out that the noise was not food, Harry had walked the long way around the edge of the room where the scree lay quiet against the wall. One quick step worth the tig abo or tide they hated by it or kite it sway tide to bragwood kite blake guys kike guys like Floor 19 cleared without a kill, the system noted. Interfirsting. The dungeonin. Then touristing. The dungeon offered you a fight. You declined and took the door instead. There is no rule that says you must bleed for every floor. There are only boys. WHO have not worked that out yet, and you are no longer one of them. You sound almost pleased, Harry said. He was sitting on the top step of floor 20 with his back against the cool wall, letting his legs shake themselves out now that no one could see them. I am a ledger. Allegers do not feel pleasure, but I will tell you a true thing, Harry Potter, because you earned it with 3 rocks and a coal head. Most WHO enter a place like this believe in strength is the only currency. They rich in insay. You are poor and stirring than cleaver with what you have. That is a better starting hand than a list. Floor 31 gave him boots when his own trainers finally came apart at the toe on the flint of a scrambling climb. The beast that had guarded them, a thing like a lizard cased in overlapping plate, had died hard, and Harry had earned a long shallow cut down his left forearm getting under its guard, and had learned, sitting afterward with a strip torn from his own shirt bound around it, exactly how much a wound like that took out of a person's steadiness for the next hour. He filed nothing away. He was 10 and did not narrate his life to himself. But the next time something came at him low and armored, he did not go under its guard. He went for its eyes with a handful of the pale grit off the floor, and finished it while it was blind and did not get cut at all. Item ackward, the underweren boats, soft sulphid. Quite on soft sold, cuit on stone. The dead do not always hear you coming. Try to deserve that advantage. By the 50th floor the beasts had grown, and so had he, though the second was harder to see than the first. The dusk rats gave way to gnashers the size of ponies, and the cave hounds to a thing the system called a fellbore, a mountain of muscle and tusk that filled the whole width of a long gallery and could not, being so large, turn quickly in it. Harry learned the gallery before he learned the bore. He walked its length in the dark, counting his steps, finding the 2 pillars of old fallen rock that narrowed the passage near the middle, and then he woke the boar with a shout and let it come, and did not run straight. Because a thing that cannot turn quickly is only dangerous in a straight line. He ran a curve. He put a pillar between them at the last instant, and the fell boar hit the pillar at a speed that shook grit from the ceiling and stood swaying and stunned. And Harry did the rest with a paring knife in both hands and a great deal of unwillingness, because it was a large death, and he was a small boy, and he had discovered that he did not enjoy this, would never enjoy this, and thought that was probably important, though he could not have said why. Floor 50 sleared, said the system, and then, after a pause it did not usually take, you do not like it, the killing. I have it stod 50 floors of you, Harry Potter, and you have not ons ingenuity singly. I am nodding it. Not as a weakness. As a fact about we sure deep. To griefer flows will ask, which the deeper flows will ask about, and which you had best have answer for. Harry sat with that a while. Water ticked somewhere in the dark. I don't want to be like them, he said finally, and did not explain who he meant, and the system did not ask, because a ledger keeps the entries whether or not it understands them. Somewhere past the 50th floor, the system introduced him to the numbers. He had been vaguely aware of them from the start. Small readouts that appeared and faded. A sense that the place was measuring him. Now, on a wide floor with 3 exits and no immediate enemy, it laid them out plainly, the way a patient adult might finally sit a child down and explain the rules of a game he'd been losing. You have been growing and have not looked at yourself. Look. Entrant. Harry G.S. Payers. Look. Entrant. Harry Death. Floor 52. Constitution. Hardening. From frail. Speed Cuick. Cunding. Frail. And speed Cuick. Cunding. High. And climbing. Will. One tested. Affinity. Dormant. Affinity dormant. Aravity. What's an affinity? The thing in you that this world will later call magic and pretend to have invite. The beast floors will not wake it. Claws and teeth do not can talk on that particular dorn. For now you fight with a body and a cane knife and a mind, and of the 3, your mind is the only one that has frightened anything down here. Will is untested, he said, because that one bothered him more than the sleeping magic. Yexense. And I will not tell you what tests it, because forewarning would spoil the answer. When your will is tested, you will not need me to tell you. You will feel it the way you feel at the New Athens Partis S1. The beasts grew stranger as the floors deepened. Less like animals and more like the idea of animals dreamed by the dark itself. On floor 77, a swarm of things like luminous eels swam through the air of a flooded cavern, and Harry, who could not fight what he could not touch, worked out that they steered by the green moss light and were blind to the deeper dark, and he put out the light he carried by then, a chunk of glowing moss in a torn pocket, and moved through them in the black, by feel, with his eyes shut and his hands out, and reached the stair by touch, and only opened his eyes when the whole cavern of light was behind him. He was shaking again. He had begun to make a kind of peace with the shaking. It came when the danger left, not while it was present, and he decided this meant he could be trusted. That the part of him that fell apart had the courtesy to wait until falling apart would not get him killed. On floor 90, a thing waited that did not attack. It sat in the middle of a dry, warm chamber, a beast the size of a large dog, with too many joints in its legs and a face that was almost, not quite, a face. And it watched him come in and did nothing. Harry stopped at the entrance. 90 floors had taught him that a beast doing nothing was the most expensive thing in the dungeon. "What do you see?" the system asked. "A trap," Harry said. "It wants me to walk to it, or it wants me to think it's hurt, so I'll come close." He looked at the floor between them. Dry, warm, too dry, too warm. When every other floor had wept water from the rock. The floor's wrong. It's warm because there's something under it. There is. And Harry picked up a stone and tossed it, underhand, to land halfway between himself and the watching beast. The floor where it landed folded downward without a sound. A pit. Its false crust dropping into a red glow far below, a heat that rolled up and out and made him step back, and the beast in the center did not flinch, because the beast in the center was the bait, and the pit was the jaws. The floor itself was the enemy, said the system. The creature was a lurge. You have just declined it not, to there are no witnesses here. There is only me, and I do not believe in lying. Flow or 90. You may pass along the edge. The lurge will not follow. It is rule. IT has been sitting in the DAC for a long time, waiting for someone's careful than you. He edged around the room with his back to the wall, watching the false floor, watching the rooted thing, watch him with its almost face and something in the way it did not move, could not move, had waited so long for prey that would never now come. Put a small ache in him that he had no room for, and set aside and carried down the stair anyway. Floors 91 through 99 were the dungeon sharpening its knives for the gate, and it did not pretend otherwise. They came fast and mean one after another, with barely a landing between them for Harry to catch his breath and retie the strip of cloth over the cut on his shoulder that would not quite close. 94 was the one he thought about afterward. It was a chamber of tall, thin stones, standing on end like a forest of gray teeth, and among them moved a beast he never saw whole, only pieces of it, sliding between the pillars, a flank here, a long jaw there, always at the edge of the moss light, always gone by the time he turned his head. It was fast, and it was patient about being fast, and it had clearly killed a great many things by being the last part of itself they ever saw. Harry stopped trying to see it. He stood with his back to one of the tall stones where nothing could come at him from behind, and he shut his eyes and he listened. The beast moved almost without sound. Almost. There was a faint, dry whisper where its body brushed the standing stones, and if he held still and stopped his own breathing, he could hear which stones it touched, and build in the dark behind his eyes a map of a thing he could not see. Its long shape threading the forest, circling in, drawing the loop tighter the way the knocking would later draw it tighter, the way everything patient down here eventually did. He let it circle. He listened to the whisper come round and round closer, and he counted the beats between the stones it brushed. And when the rhythm told him it was about to slide past the pillar at his own back, close, on his blind side, he did not wait to see it. He drove the paring knife backhand into the gap at his shoulder, into a body he had never once laid eyes on, and felt it strike home. And only then opened his eyes to a thing thrashing itself to death against the standing stones, long and pale and many-legged, and even dying it kept trying to show him only pieces of itself, as if it did not know how to be seen all at once. Flow or 94 cleared, said the system. You killed a thing you never saw. You build it saw. You build it out of sound and stirruck the modal, not the monster. I want you to remember you can do that. The floors far bore this one will show you a great many things that are not there, and hide the one thing that is. Harry cleaned the knife on the moss and did not answer. His shoulder ached. He was tired in a way that had stopped being about any one floor and become simply the shape of him now. A boy carved down to what he needed and nothing spare. But the tiredness had a floor under it, a hard, clean confidence that had not been there at the top of the first stair, and he stood on that and let the 94th darkness settle behind him, and went down. The 100th floor was different, and it was meant to be. He knew before the stair had finished opening. The air changed, grew close and hot, and full of a smell like a butcher's shop left too long. And the readout that printed itself in the dark was bordered, for the first time, in red. Flow War 100 OF 1000, the first gate, Beast Lord, the Gene Now King, Slyessence, wherein tier apex. This is not a flow. IT is a door with a gorgon. The first 100 floors have been the question. This is Wethern you have been lens. The chamber beyond was enormous, a cathedral of stone, its ceiling lost in the dark, its floor a churned waste of old bones ground to gravel by generations of feeding. And at the center of it, rising as Harry came in, was the Gnaw King. It had been a rat once, the way a mountain had been a stone once. Now it was the size of a cart horse, humped and scarred, its fur gone in patches to show gray hide seamed with the healed over wounds of 100 smaller kings it had eaten to become the only one. Its eyes were the dull red of the moss light multiplied 1,000 times. Its teeth were the length of Harry's forearm. It smelled him, and it did not charge. That was the thing that told Harry the 100 Floors had truly ended, and something new had begun. It did not charge. It circled. It was patient. It had learned patience the same way he had, the hard way, over a long time, by watching quicker things die of being quick. It thinks, Harry said quietly. It thinks the way a king thinks, not like a man, like a thing that has never lost and cannot Imogen losing. That is its stand. That is its snarn. Find where it is also its meekness. You have until it tease you are not worth skirkling. Harry made himself stand still and look, properly look, the way he'd looked at 99 floors of teeth, while the Gnaw King paced its slow ring around him, and the bone gravel crunched under its weight, and his own smallness pressed in on him from every side. A cart horse of muscle and old rage. He could not outfight it. He could not outrun it in the open. It had 4 legs, and he had 2. And the chamber was wide and gave him nowhere to make it turn. He could not blind it with grit. It had scarred over worse. Everything that had worked on the floors above was a tool this thing had already survived in miniature 100 times. But it circled. It would not close. And the thing that has never lost, the system had said, cannot imagine losing. Harry looked at the ceiling lost in the dark, and the churned floor of ground bone, and the way the Gnaw King's ring kept it always the same distance from him. A careful distance. A learned distance. The distance at which nothing had ever managed to hurt it. And he understood that the Gnaw King was not circling him. It was circling the memory of every quick, clever, desperate thing that had ever tried to close that distance and died on those teeth. It was fighting them. It had never once in all its long reign had to fight something that refused to come to it. So Harry sat down. He sat down in the middle of the bone gravel, cross-legged, the paring knife loose in his hand, and he waited. And he did nothing, and he watched the Gnaw King with the patience it had taught him without meaning to. The great rat completed one circle and another, and its red eyes flicked, and its ring drew tighter, because a thing sitting still is not behaving the way prey behaves, and a mind that has only ever known one story does not do well when the story stops making sense. Tighter. The smell of it rolled over him. He did not move. Tighter. Close enough now that he could see the wet shine of its teeth, close enough that its patience, which had never in its life been tested by stillness greater than its own, finally cracked, and it lunged. That was the whole of Harry's plan. To make a thing that had won by never being impatient. Be impatient, once, for 1 second at close range on ground of his choosing. He had not chosen the ground until this exact moment. He was sitting on the softest patch of the churned floor because soft meant deep, and deep meant the king's own weight. When it committed, would carry it a half step further than it meant to go, into gravel that gave. It lunged. Its forefeet came down where he had been. He was not there. He had rolled the instant it left the ground, out and under and along its flank, on the soft-soled boots that made no sound, into the one place a thing built to face its enemies cannot easily reach, alongside and behind, against the great muscle of its haunch where it had turned to strike and could not turn again fast enough. And Harry, who did not enjoy this, and would never enjoy this, put the paring knife into the tendon at the back of its hind leg, the long cord that let it stand and turn and be a king, and drew it across with all the weight of a boy who had climbed and fought and refused to die for 100 floors, and severed it. The Gnaw King screamed and went down on its ruined leg, and the whole cathedral of bone rang with it. It thrashed, enormous and blind with pain. And Harry did not stay to be crushed by the thrashing. He was already gone, out and clear, up onto a fallen rib of rock at the chamber's edge, breathing hard, watching the king that had never lost discover, at the very end, the shape of losing. He did not gloat. He waited until it had stopped being dangerous, which took longer than he liked, and then he came down and finished it, because leaving a thing to suffer was a kind of lie too, and he had decided, somewhere in the last 100 floors, what kinds of lies he would not tell. Flowmore 100 cleared, said the system, and the red border of the readout cooled to silver, and something in the way the letters formed was almost, not quite, like a thing letting out a breath that had been holding on his behalf. The first gate is open. Harry Potter have kept the score of a great many. I will tell you what I have never told any of them, because none of them said you did not beat the Ginya Dang with the cane life. You beat it with the one thing it had never seen. You made it wait, and then you made it stop waiting. Ward 1 locked, the Warren's Tithe. A soft weight settled into Harry's hands out of the air. A cloak, dark and close woven, light as nothing, that seemed to drink the moss light rather than reflect it. I teams quired, the deuce quired cave wave kluk. W veen from the silence of 100 floors. It will not make you invisible. IT will make you a not-a-kid, which is better and harder and yours. Harry pulled it around his shoulders. It settled like it had been made for him, which he was beginning to understand. In some strange way it had. He was 10 years old, standing in a cathedral of bone 100 floors beneath a sleeping house, and he was not the same boy who had put his hand to a seam of light in a cupboard. He was still small. His glasses were still taped. But he had learned 100 floors of the truth that no one at number 4 had ever wanted him to know. That the world's estimate of him was not a measurement. It was only an opinion, and opinions, it turned out, could be walked straight through if you found the door. The floors from 100 to 200 belonged to the Deep Warren, and they did not repeat the floors above. The system had warned him. The first 100 Taeg hurt you the grammar. These will teach you that the grammar has exceptions, and it kept the promise the way it kept the score, exacting and without mercy. The beasts of the Deep Warren were fewer and worse. They came rarely, and when they came changed by the dark, grown strange, each one a problem that had to be solved fresh because the solution to the last one would only get him killed. Floor 1 2012 took his paring knife and gave him nothing for it but a lesson. The beast was a slow gray thing armored in a shell like riverstone, and it did not chase and did not lunge. It simply came and would not stop coming. And when Harry drove the knife into the one seam he could find in its plating, the blade snapped off, flush, and the beast came on with the broken metal in it, as though it had swallowed a splinter. He spent a bad half hour then, unarmed, learning a thing he would carry all the way to the bottom of the dungeon, that some enemies are not solved by the weapon in your hand, but by the room around it. He led the shelled thing, step by patient step, onto a slick apron of wet stone above a drop it could not see, and did not have the eyes to fear, and he stood at the very lip of it, bait, until it committed its whole grinding weight to the last few feet, and then he stepped aside and let the floor do what floors do to things too heavy and too certain, and it went over, and did not come back up. Item lost, the paring knife, the system noted. I terved you 111 floors. FW tools last so long. FW wilders, deserve them. The dungeon has seen you fem, the seen you fight without one, and found you still dangerous. Take. What floor 112 laves you? What floor 112 left him, half buried in the grit where the shelled thing had first been sleeping, was a longer blade, dark and cold and faintly notched along its edge as though it had bitten through things harder than it should have and survived the meal. Item acquired. The Werin Fang, alder than the bastes that guard in the Chin Semperi Z's that guard it. It remembers being carried down these stairs by someone sem, a long time ago. We did not reach the bottom. Da Badane, not reach the bottom. Da Badane. 4122 was a single beast in a chamber of standing black water, a thing that could not be found because it lived in the reflection. Harry saw it in the water's surface moving, hunting him, and saw nothing above the water at all, and spent a long and frightening time working out that the reflection was the animal and the empty air above it was the trick, and that he had to strike at the water and not at the space where his eyes told him a body should be. He was wrong twice. He carried the second wrong away with a set of shallow cuts across his shoulder where the thing had come out of the water at him from an angle. His eyes refused to believe. He got it right the third time, standing waist deep in cold black water, striking down at a reflection with his eyes half soot against what his eyes wanted to tell him. And afterward he sat on the stair shivering and understood something about trusting the evidence over the instinct that he would need again, much deeper, when the lies got better. Floor 131 taught him that the Deep Warren could lie about which way was down. It was a chamber that tilted, a great slow canting floor of smooth stone that shifted its angle as he crossed, so that the stair he was walking towards slid uphill, and the walls leaned and his own sense of level turned traitor, and somewhere in the tilting a beast waited that had grown up in the canting dark and knew exactly how to use a floor that would not hold still. Harry felt it before he saw it, a weight shifting counter to his own, using the tilt always coming from the downhill side where his feet wanted to slide. He could not fight uphill against a thing that fought with gravity. So he stopped fighting the tilt. He let it take him. Let his feet slide, went with the cant instead of against it, and made the beast commit to an intercept that assumed he would keep struggling toward the stair. And then he was not where a struggling boy should be. He had ridden the slide past the beast's reach and fetched up against the downhill wall, low, braced. While the creature overran the place he had been meant to be trapped, he put the Warnfang into it as it slid past, using its own momentum in the floor's tilt to do the work his arms could not, and it went down the cant and did not climb back up. Flow or 131-3 cleared, the system said. The F-lore lead about down and you believe the floor instead of your own. You are learning the hardest thing the Deep Warren teaches, that where the ground itself is the enemy, you do not plant itself is the enemy. You do not plant your feet. You ride. Floor 150 was quiet, and the quiet nearly killed him. It was a long, low gallery, empty, its stair visible at the far end, and every instinct he had learned said walk carefully. And every instinct he had learned said walk carefully, and every instinct screamed that the emptiness was the trap. He spent an hour at the entrance and found nothing. No false floor, no lure, no reflection, no swarm. just a long, empty room and a stair. In the end, he understood that there was, in fact, nothing to find, and that the test of floor 150 was whether 150 floors of danger had broken his ability to simply cross a room, whether the dungeon had made him so afraid of the dark that an empty dark could pin him in place as surely as any beast. He made himself walk. It was one of the hardest floors he cleared, and nothing touched him. And the system said nothing at all until he reached the stair, and then it said only, "So mornis are emtd, not mani. Beautifig you cannot cross the imtili, owns you will never reach the full owns." Floor 164 was the one that nearly ended him, and it ended nothing, and Harry understood afterward that the difference between those two facts had been a single held breath, and the habit, learned over 160 floors, of never fully trusting a floor that had gone quiet. It was a wide chamber of hanging stone, stalactites like a mouthful of teeth, and it was empty when he came in, and the stair down stood open and visible on the far side, unbarred, as though the floor were simply giving itself to him. He had learned on floor 90 what an open gift in the dark was worth. He did not walk to the stair. He crouched at the entrance and studied the chamber, and he could find nothing. No lure, no false floor, no reflection, no swarm. And for a while he thought this was floor 150 again, the empty room, the test of nerve. Then he looked up. The ceiling was moving. What he had taken for stalactites were not all stone. Some of them breathed, hung head down and patient, a colony of pale-winged things the size of dogs, folded and still, waiting for a warm moving body to cross beneath them so they could drop on it all at once out of the dark. They hunted by falling. The whole floor was a ceiling that fell, and a boy who walked to the open stair with his eyes on the open stair would have been buried under 100 descending bodies before he understood the room had teeth. Harry stayed crouched at the entrance and did the arithmetic. He could not cross without passing beneath them. He could not fight 100 falling things in the open. But they hunted warmth and motion, and he had a cloak woven from the silence of 100 floors, and he had learned in the deep warren that the affinity was not the only tool he carried. He took a chunk of the glowing moss and warmed it in his hands and threw it, hard, to the far corner of the chamber, away from the stair. A warm, bright moving thing, arsing through the dark, and the ceiling fell on it. 100 pale bodies dropped as one on the place where the moss landed. A soft, thunderous rush of wings and grasping limbs converging on a fist of warm light that was not a boy, and in the several seconds they spent discovering their mistake in the far corner, Harry crossed the chamber beneath a ceiling gone suddenly empty, quick and quiet, on the soft-soled boots, and reached the stair, and went down. And behind him the colony rose, baffled back into the dark to hang and wait for prey, with better sense than to walk under a ceiling. Floor 164 cleared, the system noted. You look up. The mule looked up. Almost no one looks up. The floor has killed a great many thens that kept their vlor. You see, kept yours on the room. I have said it before, and the floors keep proving it. You do not die of the tanger you are looking at. You die of the one you are not. By floor 180 he had changed in ways he could see. His hands did not shake anymore, not after, not before. He had grown, not much, but his trousers had gone short at the ankle and his shoulders had filled the torn shirt, and he had a wiry, watchful economy to the way he moved through a dark space, testing the floor before he trusted it, reading a room the way he'd once read the moods of the kitchen at Privet Drive. He had learned to sleep in the safe pockets between floors, curled in the duskweave cloak, and to wake all at once and ready, and to eat what the cleared floors gave him. A kind of dense, pale bread that grew from the moss where a beast had died, which tasted of nothing and filled him completely, and which he had stopped questioning around floor 110. And he had learned, without ever putting it into words, that he was good at this. Not strong, not the biggest thing in any room he had ever entered, but good at seeing, at waiting, at the cold, clear arithmetic of a room full of ways to die and one narrow way to live. It was the first thing he had ever been good at that no one could take from him or punish him for or pretend he hadn't done. The 204 came, and it was another gate, bordered in red, and it held the last and worst of the Warren tier, a thing the system called the Mother of the Deep, a pale mountain of a beast that had never left the chamber where it had been born and had grown to fill it, blind and enormous and wreathed in the young it endlessly bore and endlessly fed, so that to fight it was to fight 100 small quick things in one vast slow one at once. Harry stood at the entrance a long time reading it, and did not go in for what the system reckoned was 3 hours. The mother filled the far half of the chamber, a wall of pale flesh that breathed, and her young ranged out from her in loose tides, dozens of them, each the size of a cat, each blind as she was, streaming out across the floor and streaming back, out and back, in a rhythm he watched until he could have set a clock by it. He had learned by now that a rhythm was a promise, and a promise could be spent. When he finally moved, he did not fight the Mother of the Deep at all. He had seen that she tracked the world entirely through her children, that they were her eyes and her hands, that where they touched, she knew, and where nothing of hers had gone, she was blind. So Harry did the thing that had worked on the Gnaw King, turned inside out. He did not make himself still, he made himself absent. He put on the duskweave cloak. It will make you unnoticed, which is better. And he stepped into the tide of ranging young at the exact beat of the rhythm when the greatest number of them were streaming outward, away, so that the gap where he stood was a gap they were already leaving. He moved with the outrush and against the return, threading the blind current of her children without letting one of them so much as brush his knee, a hole in the world she could not feel because none of her 100 eyes had reported it. And he crossed the whole vast chamber in the blind spot of a blind god, and reached the stair, and went down, and never once raised the Warren Fang. Flaw 200 cleared without a kill, said the system, and this time it did not pretend to be only a ledger. 200 floors, Harry Potter, the Warren is behind you. You entered it a frightened child with a paring knife, and you leave it something the dark has learned to step around. I have couture score shorslinously. Here is what it says. Entrant, Harry W.D., Potter, depth, floor 200, first tire complete. Constitution, Temperance, Pinner W.R., 6-star. Complete tust, speed, fast cunnand. Skunder, will, chetted on sea, and held. A fiffinity dormant, stirring. Harry read the last line twice. Stirring. What wakes it? He asked. The stair below him did not open onto more stone. It opened onto light, a warm, dry, golden light, utterly unlike the green, wet glow of the Warren, spilling up the steps with a smell of old paper and beeswax and something like the inside of a very large, very patient building. The change was so total that Harry stood at the top of the stair and simply looked at it, at the gold pouring up out of the dark, not moving. The next 200 floors do not warrant your knife, said the system, and there might have been, in the crisp, bright letters, something that in a person would have been the beginning of a smile. The wire your mind, and they will not a suck up to forgery. The base are base, 100 somebody behind you, Harry Potter. You have cleared 200 flows. Ace 100 remain. Go down. The thorns go down. Let you see how you answer. Harry Potter drew the duskweave cloak around his shoulders and settled the Warren Fang at his hip, where he could reach it and hoped he would not need it, and walked down into the gold. Chapter 1, End. Chapter 2, The Floors That Read You Back. There were no monsters at the bottom of the stair. There was a librarian, and Harry decided almost at once that he preferred the monsters. The floor opened into a hall so tall its ceiling was a rumor. Shelves ran up the walls and kept running, story on story of them, ladders on brass rails sliding of their own accord between galleries, and every shelf was full, and every book was breathing. Not literally, though on floor 230 he would meet some that were, but breathing in the way a full room breathes. A pressure of held attention, 10,000 spines, all faintly aware that someone new had come in. Warm light fell from lamps that hung on nothing. The air smelled of paper and beeswax, and the particular dust that only gathers on things people have loved and left alone. And in the middle of it, at a desk that had been built for a giant and occupied by something that was not one, sat the librarian. It was made of paper. That was the first honest thing Harry could say about it. A person's shape, folded and quilled and bound from 1,000 loose leaves, its face a smooth blank sheet on which expressions wrote and unwrote themselves in a fast brown cursive he could not read. It had been reading when he came in. It set its book down, and it looked at him, and words scrolled across the blank of its face too quickly to catch, and then it spoke. And its voice was the sound of a great many pages turning at once. You cannot fight me, said the librarian. You may try. Others have. I have their attempts on file. Floor 201, 1000, the system printed, off to the side, small and dry. The Athen. The Seant Tier is a library that did not like how its last visit tours readed it. The Warren wanted your body. This wants your attention, and it is far harder to give it. You may not leave a floor here until you have answered it. The Warren Fang will do you no good. Leave it shethid. It makes the books nervous. Harry looked at the paper thing and at the shelves climbing into the dark, and he became aware of a problem he had been carrying up out of the Warren without knowing it. A problem that had never mattered when the only questions were teeth. He could barely read. The Dursleys had not troubled themselves. He had gone to school when they let him, and he had learned his letters the way you learn to flinch, defensively, enough to get by, and no more. Dudley's cast-off comics and the labels on tins and the print on the eviction of his attention every time he'd try to slip off with the library book that was really Dudley's and would be missed. He knew the shapes of words. He did not know the inside of them. And here was a floor built entirely of the thing he did not know how to do, run by a creature made of the thing he could not do it to. He did not say any of this. He had learned in the Warren that the first move was always the same. Read the room before it reads you. So he walked to the giant's desk, and he looked up at the paper librarian, and he asked the only question that seemed both true and safe. What happens if I answer wrong? The cursive on the librarian's face slowed, as if the question were an unusual one, worth writing carefully. You do not fall, it said. You do not bleed. You simply stay. The floor does not open for a wrong answer. It waits. Some who came before me are waiting still, several floors down, having answered 9 questions and stopped on the 10th. Time below is not time above, entrant. You could spend a life on floor 240 and arrive at the surface an hour after you left, having aged a decade for nothing. That is the shape of the danger here. It does not kill you. It keeps you. Harry took that in. He thought about the Warren, where every danger had at least had the decency to try to end quickly. This was worse in a way the Warren had never been, a danger with all the time in the world that wanted only to make him waste his. Then I'd better answer right, he said. The first questions were kind, and he understood that they were meant to be the same courtesy the first floor had shown him with a paring knife and a rat the size of a terrier. The librarian was teaching him the grammar again, a new grammar, and Harry, who had spent his life reading rooms and faces and the space between what people said and what they meant, discovered within 3 floors that he had been doing this kind of thing all along. He simply hadn't been allowed to call it thinking. 42102 asked him to find among 10,000 identical black-bound books the one that was lying. He walked the galleries for an hour and found nothing, and sat down defeated on a rolling ladder, and only then, idle, watching the ladder drift along its rail, noticed that every book on every shelf was covered in the same fine paper dust, except one, on a high shelf, whose dust had been disturbed, as though it alone had been recently opened, or as though it alone was pretending to have been read. He climbed to it. Its title was a lie. It claimed to be a history, and it was a book of blank pages, and blank pages in a library where every other book breezed with content, were the only lie the room could tell. The stair opened. You did not read a single word, the librarian observed, from wherever it observed things. You solved the library without reading. I have never seen that done. I am not certain whether to be impressed or insulted. Both? Probably, Harry said and went down. 42111 gave him a door with 100 locks and no keys, and a plaque that said only the true Statman opens. Opens a me, above 2 brass plates, and on the left plate the words the right hand plate. And on the left plate the words the right hand plate late. And on the right plate, the words both plates tell the truth. He stood in front of it for a long time, and he was afraid, in the particular airless way the Athenaeum taught him to be afraid, the fear not of dying but of being caught here, of the hours stacking up unseen while somewhere above a boy's empty bed grew cold. He made himself slow down. He made himself do the thing the Warren had taught him, not to trust the instinct, but to trust the evidence, and to test each possibility against the world until only one was left standing. Suppose the right plate told the truth, that both plates tell the truth. Then the left plate also told the truth, and the left plate said the right plate lies, which meant the right plate did not tell the truth, which was a contradiction, and contradictions, he was learning, were the sound a wrong answer made, so the right plate lied. And if the right plate lied when it claimed both plates were true, then at least one plate was false, which he already knew was the right one, and that left the left plate free to be either. He pressed the left plate, betting that a puzzle that had gone to the trouble of proving the right plate false wanted him to trust the one it had left standing, and the 100 locks turned over all at once with a sound like applause. Logic, said the librarian, appearing folded at his elbow, its cursive face composing something that might have been approval. You reason like a person who has had to work out, very young, which of the adults around him could be believed. That is a sad way to have learned it. It is also an extremely effective one. Harry did not answer that. Some things the paper thing said landed too close to true, and he had learned in the Warren not to strike at a thing just because it had found a gap in his guard. Floor 219 was the one that nearly kept him, and it kept him not with difficulty but with pride, which he decided afterward was the more dangerous of the two. It was a chessboard the size of a ballroom, and the pieces were his height, and the plaque said only, win. There was no opponent. The black pieces stood in their ranks and did not move, and Harry walked the white side of the board for a long time trying to work out who he was playing against and how a game could be won against a side that would not take its turn. He said a pawn forward. Nothing answered it. He said another. Nothing. He understood, slowly, that the floor was not asking him to beat an opponent. It was asking him to find the position, hidden somewhere in the frozen board, in which white had already won and simply had not noticed, a checkmate that existed on the board as it stood, if only he could see it, buried under the ordinary clutter of a game in progress. He walked the ranks and read the board the way the Athenaeum had begun teaching him to read everything, looking not at what moved but at what already was, and he found it, a white bishop and a white rook that, between them, had the black king in a net 3 moves deep that no one had bothered to close. He closed it. He walked the bishop to the square that ended the game that had already been over, and the black king toppled of its own accord, and the stair opened, and the librarian's voice drifted after him, dry as a turned page. The position was winning before you entered the room. Most spend hours trying to build a victory. You are the first in a long while to look down and notice one was already there. Floor 226 asked him to weigh a lie. 12 identical silver coins lay on a table beside a balance with 2 pans, and 11 were true and 1 was false, and the false one was either heavier or lighter. He was not told which, and the plaque allowed him 3 weighings and no more before the floor decided he had failed. He sat on the cold, clean floor of the Athenaeum and did the arithmetic of it in his head, dividing the coins into 3s, reasoning through which Wayne told him what, and the pleasure of it surprised him, the sheer clean pleasure of a problem that had exactly one path and would yield to nothing but thought. He found the false coin, a light one, on the 3rd weighing, and he was almost sorry when the stair opened, because for a little while, bent over a balance in a library under the earth, he had forgotten to be afraid of anything at all. The affinity woke on floor 238, and it did not knock politely. He had known it was coming. The stat readout had said stirring at the bottom of the warren and had said, in the 200s, waking. The word climbing steadily as the floors made him think harder and stranger. He had felt it the way the system had promised he would, like a tooth gone bad, an ache behind the eyes on the harder puzzles, a pressure that built when he concentrated and did not quite go away when he stopped. Floor 238 was a room full of candles, unlit, hundreds of them, arranged in a spiral, and a single lit candle at the center, and the plaque said, "Light the last candle without crossing your own path, and without let up crossing your own path, and without letting any flam talk another." It was a maze problem dressed as a fire problem, and Harry solved the maze part in his head in 20 minutes, tracing the one route through the spiral that visited every candle once and returned to none. But solving the route was not lighting the candles. He had one flame at the center and hundreds of cold wicks, and the plaque forbade him to carry the center flame along his route because carrying it meant crossing back through the spiral, crossing his own path, the one thing it disallowed. He stood among the cold candles and looked at the single burning one and wanted, with a sudden and total want, for the flame to simply be where he needed it, to leap the gap, to be in two places, to do the thing that the room had built itself specifically to make impossible, and the candle nearest his hand lit. He felt it happen. That was the part that undid him for a moment. Standing very still in the spiral with the new small flame trembling at his elbow. He had not touched it. He had wanted it, and the wanting had gone out of him and into the wick with a soft, cool release, like a held breath finally let go, and there was fire where there had been none. Obedient to a thing he had done without any idea how he had done it. Affinity, waking, the system printed, and for once the letters were not dry. It her drew. Harry Potter. What you have just done is the thing the world above will spend 7 years teaching children. The brig raven forev, and word and the wand and a word and a great deal of ceremony. You did it was a want, and a room dejan satchins a provoke one. The Athenaeum does not teach maggot. It provokes it. It bliles piedzalizals that cannot be solved without wishining for the thing inchins. Do not be frightened. Be careful. A want is a loaded thing. Harry lit the candles the rest of the way with wants. He walked his route and did not carry the flame. He simply arrived beside each cold wick and asked it without words to burn, and one by one they did. And when the last candle in the spiral lit, the plaque was satisfied and the stair opened, and he sat down on the top step of it and shook. Not from fear this time. From the sheer strangeness of having a new sense and no idea yet of its shape. He experimented. Of course he experimented. He was 10 and had just found out he could set things on fire by wishing, and there is no boy alive who would not test that. But he tested it the way the Warren had taught him to test a floor, carefully at the edges, watching the cost. And there was a cost. Each want spent something. A dozen candles left him fine, a hard sustained wanting, the kind it took to hold a flame in the air against nothing. Left him hollow and gray and needing to sit, the way the cut on his forearm had once left him unsteady for an hour. He mapped it. He learned how much he had and how fast it came back and how stupid it would be to spend it all on a floor and meet the next one empty. The system watched him do this and said once, quietly, most WHLH the affinity spend the first day drunk on it. You spent it taking inventory. I have stopped being surprised by you. I find I miss it. He learned its edges over the next dozen floors the way he had learned everything else, by paying for each fact once and not twice. He learned that the want worked best when it was specific, that asking a candle to burn was easy, and asking the air to be warmer was nearly impossible, because the air did not know what he meant and the candle did. He learned that he could pull as well as push, could draw a falling key across a floor to his hand if he pictured it clearly enough, and that picturing it clearly enough was most of the work. He learned that fear made the want clumsy and calm made it precise, which struck him as deeply unfair given how much of the dungeon was built to frighten him. And he learned, on a floor that asked him to hold a door open with nothing while he crossed beneath it, that the affinity had a temper of its own, that if he spent too much and reached for more anyway, it did not simply refuse. It bit. A hard gray wave went through him, and the door nearly came down on him, and he crawled clear and lay on the far stair a long time learning the last and most important edge, that the thing waking inside him was a tool and not a friend, and that a tool used past its limit takes the hand that holds it. 4252 was the Athenaeum's cleverest cruelty, and it used the affinity against him instead of the other way around. It was a reading room, quiet and warm, and in the center on a lectern lay an open book, and the plaque said, "Read the book Alice from first word to last," and the staropens. Harry approached it warily, because a floor that simply asked him to read was either a gift or a trap, and the Athenaeum did not give gifts. The book was written in a plain hand and began plainly enough. A story about a boy in a house, and Harry read the first page aloud, and the second, and somewhere on the third page he understood the trap, and it was elegant and horrible. The book was writing itself as he read, and it was writing about him, drawing on the newly woken affinity to reach into what he wanted and put it on the page. so that the story on the 4th page was about a boy in a house who was loved, and on the 5th page about a boy whose parent were alive, and every word he read aloud made their korpdok. The plaque had not lied. Reading it to the last word would open the stair, but the book had no last word. It grew as he read, spinning out his own wands faster than he could speak them, a story with no ending that he would want to read forever. He stopped reading. That was the whole of the answer, and it was one of the hardest things the tear asked of him, harder than any logic door, because it was not a puzzle with the mind, but of the hand, the simple physical act of closing a book that was telling him he was loved. He put his palm flat on the warm page, on a sentence about a mother who had lived, and he closed the cover on it, and the plaque had said read it to the last word, and he had understood, closing it, that the last word of a book that writes itself forever is the reader's own decision to stop, that some stories end only when you choose to end them, and that choosing to close a beautiful lie is a kind of literacy too, maybe the most important kind. The stair opened kind. The stair opened kind. You closed it, the librarian said, folded in quiet at his shoulder, its cursive face composing something that was almost grief and almost pride. The book would have kept you longer than the mirrors keep anyone, because the mirrors show you a lie, and this told you one in your own voice. You closed it on the best sentence it had. I did not think you could. I am so rarely wrong, entrant, and I find I do not mind being wrong about you. The library did not stay a library. Around floor 270, the shelves began to thin, and the character of the puzzles changed, growing colder, more geometric, until Harry came down a stair one day and there were no books at all, only brass. Biome, shift, the clockwork vault, the system announced. The Athenaeum, ask, the Hethenaeum asked what you canoe. This ask, weathery canoe. This hask sweater you can think while the floor is moving. IT will not wait for you. Timing is the new grammar. Thurns fant, the vault does not repeat itself, and it's not sentimental about latecomers. The clockwork vault was made of motion. Its floors were vast machines, gears the size of houses turning in oiled silence, pistons the height of church towers rising and falling, walkways that swung on pendulums, bridges that were only bridges for the 3rd second of every 9th beat. There were no monsters. There was only the machine, indifferent and enormous, and the certainty that if he mistimed a crossing it would fold him into itself without malice and without pause, the way a clock does not hate the fly caught in its works. Harry found he loved it, and was a little ashamed of loving it. After the Athenaeum, where every floor had spoken to him in a voice that knew too much about how he'd grown up, the vault was a relief. It wanted nothing from him but attention and nerve. It did not know his name or care about his childhood. It was a problem with a clean answer, and he was discovering, been happiest with those. He learned the vault's grammar on floor 281, a chamber where the only route across a bottomless gap was a series of platforms that rose and fell on the teeth of the great gears, each on its own rhythm, none matching. He stood at the edge and counted. He was good at counting now. The Warren's beasts had taught him rhythm and the Athenaeum had taught him patience. And here the two skills braided together into something new. He watched the platforms rise and fall for what the system reckoned was an hour, and did not step out until he had the whole machine memorized, every platform's beat, the narrow windows where a running child could cross 3 of them in the 4 seconds. Their rhythms briefly agreed. Then he ran it. He crossed the bottomless gap on rising and falling brass at a dead sprint, timing each leap to a count he held in his head, and reached the far side, and did not look down, and heard, behind him, the platforms grinding on in their indifferent music, never knowing he had been there. You crossed on the 4th attack to member-size in the 1st attempt to merm. Tat is the correct radio, most D here, by moving first and memorizing, never. He used the affinity in the vault too, and here it earned its keep in ways it hadn't among the candles. On floor 310, a gate could only be held open by weight on a plate across the room from the gate itself, and there was no weight to spare and no way to be in 2 places, until Harry remembered the flame he had once wanted into the air and understood that a want could hold as easily as it could burn. He put his will on a fallen brass cog the size of a dinner plate and lifted it, not with his hands, with the hollow reaching thing behind his eyes, and floated it across the chamber and set it down on the pressure plate, and the gate ground open, and he walked through it, gray-faced and swaying and grinning like a fool, because he had just done a thing that a month ago would have been a miracle and was now merely a tool. Floor 319 was the vault at its most beautiful and its most patient, and it taught Harry that the machine could be a lock as easily as a threat. It was a single, vast mechanism filling the whole chamber, a thing of 1,000 interlocking gears turning in stately silence, and set into the heart of it, behind the moving brass, was the stair down, sealed. There was no crossing to reach. The danger was not being crushed. The danger was time. The plaque, cast into a still plate at the chamber's edge, said only, "The way el pens when the great wheel and the slans. Dwayne wheel point the Sam we tell." Harry found the great wheel easily, a slow, tremendous ring of brass that took an age to complete a single turn, and he found the small wheel, a quick, bright thing spinning many times a minute, and he understood the puzzle at once and hated it for a moment, because it was not a puzzle of quemperness but of patience. The 2 wheels aligned only rarely when their turnings happened to agree, and he had to know when and be at the stair in the instant it opened, or wait for the wheels to come round again. So he counted. He sat at the edge of the great mechanism and he counted the turns of the small wheel against the crawl of the great one, and he did the arithmetic the vault had been teaching him since the platforms. How many turns of the fast wheel fit inside one turn of the slow, and therefore how long until the two hands next pointed the same way, and therefore exactly when. It was not a fight, and it was not a leap. It was a boy sitting patiently in the belly of an enormous clock, doing sums, waiting for a number he had calculated to arrive, and when it arrived, he was standing at the sealed stair with his hand ready, and the great wheel and the small wheel swung into their brief agreement, and the seal turned over, and Harry stepped down into the dark in the 2-second window before the wheels fell out of true and closed the way for another hour. Flolor 319 cleared, the system said. You did not forns it, and you did not outrin. You waited for it. Feigning first worked out precisely how long the wearings first were twains. How long the waiting would be. That is a rare patience than the kin that simply interests. It is the patience that K knows the answer and chooses to arrive on time. The cost was always there. He never forgot the cost. The vault, more than the Athenaeum, taught him the discipline of it. Because in the vault, spending too much of the affinity at the wrong moment did not merely leave him tired, it left him tired while a piston came down, and twice he cut a crossing so close, weak-kneed from a want he'd spent a beat too long on, that he felt the wind of the mechanism at his back as he cleared it. After the second time, he sat on the safe side for a long while and made himself a rule, and the system recorded it without comment. Never spend the last third. Whatever the floor asks, keep a third of yourself in reserve, because the floor is not the last thing that will ask. Floor 328 was the vault at its cruelest and its cleanest, and Harry would remember it as the floor that taught him he could keep his head while the room actively tried to hurry him out of it. It was a single long corridor, and at the far end a door, and between him and the door the whole ceiling was a bank of descending blades on staggered rhythms, each falling and rising on its own beat, so that at no single instant was the corridor ever fully open or fully closed. There was no memorizing an hour of it from safety. The corridor gave no landing, no ledge, no place to stand and count. The only way to learn its rhythm was to be inside it, moving, with the machine already trying to fold him into the floor. He stood at the mouth of it and made himself do the coldest thing the vault ever asked. He walked in one pace, learned one blade, stepped back out before it fell, and did it again, and again, buying the corridor's rhythm a single blade at a time, at the price of standing under falling metal to purchase each fact. It took him a long while and a great deal of nerve and no magic at all, and when he finally had the whole sequence, he crossed it in one unbroken run, ducking and turning and pausing on counts he held in his head like a song, and the blades closed behind him on empty air, and he came out the far door with his heart going and a grin he could not help. Because the vault did not know his name, and had tried to kill him anyway, and he had simply been better at arithmetic than it was at murder. The mirror floors came in the high 300s, and they were the vault and the Athenaeum married, and they were the first floors since the knocking that genuinely frightened him. They were mazes of standing mirrors, silvered on both sides, and in them, Harry was multiplied 1,000-fold, 1,000 small dark-haired boys in taped glasses walking 1,000 corridors that were all the same corridor. The puzzle was to find the way through, and the trap was that the mirrors did not always show him. Sometimes a reflection lagged. Sometimes a reflection turned to look at him when he had not turned. Sometimes, at the corner of his eye, one of the 1,000 Harrys did something he had not done, smiled when he was not smiling, or stood watching while all the others walked. And by the time he turned to catch it, it was walking again. Innocent, one boy among 1,000 identical boys. And he could not have said which reflection had betrayed itself. What is the floor doing? The system asked, on floor 344, and Harry could hear that it was a real question, that the vault and the Athenaeum had run out of grammar and something new was being taught. It's showing me things that aren't me, Harry said slowly, standing very still in the heart of the maze while 1,000 still boys stood with him, and it wants me to chase them. If I chase a wrong reflection, I'll break the pattern and get lost. He watched the mirrors. He did not chase. He had learned in the black water of floor 122 to strike at the evidence and not the instinct, and here the instinct, every screaming animal instinct, was to whirl on the reflection that moved wrong, and the evidence said that whirling was exactly what the floor was built to make him do. So I'm not going to look at what moves, I'm going to look at what doesn't. He found the way through by ignoring every reflection that drew his eye, and following only the ones that behaved. The boring reflections, the honest ones, the 1,000 small, dark-haired boys who did nothing but exactly what he did, and among them, faint, a thread of consistency that pointed like a compass toward the one direction in which all his reflections agreed. He walked it out of the maze with his eyes half soot against the movement at the edges, trusting the still image over the moving one. And when the last mirror slid aside and the stair appeared, he let out a breath and found his hands were not entirely steady, and forgave them. Because the mirror floors had earned it. Floor 351 was the mirror's last and worst trick, and it did not use 1,000 reflections. It used one. A single tall glass stood alone in an otherwise empty room, and in it stood a single Harry, and the plaque said, "The door opens when the reflection agrees to open it." He raised his hand. The reflection raised its hand. He turned. It turned. For a long while, he could find no gap between them at all, and the airless Athenium fear crept back. The fear of being kept, of the hours stacking up in an empty room in front of an honest mirror. Then he stopped moving and simply watched, and he saw it. A lag, tiny, a half-beat where the reflection did what he did, an instant too late, as though it were not copying his body but reading his intention and choosing, each time, to comply. It was not a reflection. It was a thing that had decided to look like one, and a thing that chooses to obey, he understood, can also be asked. So he did not try to trick it or catch it out. He walked up to the glass and put his palm flat against the cold surface, the way he had once put his palm to a seam of light in a cupboard, and he did not command it and did not fight it. He only waited, honestly, hand to hand with a thing that wore his face, until it decided he was not there to conquer it, and the glass warmed under his hand, and the reflection stepped aside, and the door behind it opened, the system recorded the floor without a word, and Harry stood a moment looking at the empty glass where a version of himself had just agreed to let him pass, and did not entirely like how much he had wanted it to. The mirrors were Sol, the system said, and did not soften it. Far bore this flow there's chlor there are tears that do nothing but show you thens that are nothing but show you hins that are not there, and the thens they show you will not be reflections of a boynessura. The why will be the thens you most want. You have just prevent you can look away from a lie that w's your own face. Remember that you could. You will want the memory. Harry did not like the sound of that, and said so, and the system, for once, did not argue. Floor 400 was the second gate, and it did not roar. It was a single quiet room, circular with a checkered floor of black and white stone, and at the far side of it, seated in a high-backed chair carved from a single block of pale stone, waited a thing with the body of a lion and the wings of an eagle, and the face of a woman who had been asking the same question for longer than the Warren had held bones. A sphinx, Harry said, from the doorway. He had never seen one, and knew the word anyway. The way he had known librarian. The way the dungeon seemed to hand him the names of things a half-second before he met them. The warden of the second tier, the assistant confirmed. Flew for 400 of 1,000. She will ask you one question. You will have one answer. There is no second attempt, and no walking around her. The checker floor will not let you pass until she is Etzvis. And Saty's not been, and she has not been Setzvit, and she has not been, and is Saty's mind, in a vain Setzvis, in a very long time. Everything, the Athenodum and the vault and the Mirots taken as the Asephan Shechuash ben for this. Go, carefully. She is older than the thing the peer churf, her Tomras. Harry crossed to the middle of the checkered floor and stopped where the black and white met, and looked up at the Sphinx and waited. She looked back at him for a long moment with eyes the color of old gold, and there was nothing cruel in them, and nothing kind either. Only the patience of a thing that had all the time in the world and one job, and was very good at it. You are small, she said. Her voice was low and even, a voice with no need to hurry. The last one who reached my floor was a grown man with a staff of yew and a great opinion of himself. He is in the mirrors still, chasing the version of himself that answered correctly. Before him, a witch who had read every book above and understood none of them. Before her, I do not remember. It has been a long descent between visitors. And now a child who cannot read, and glasses mended with tape, who solved my library without opening a single book. Her wings shifted, a dry rustle. I confess you interest me. I have not been interested in a long time. Shall I ask you my question? Yes, Harry said, and then, because the Warren had taught him that the shape of a thing mattered as much as the thing itself, but tell me first, is it a riddle or is it a question? They're not the same, and I'd rather know which I'm answering. The Sphinx went very still. The gold of her eyes sharpened, the way a person's eyes sharpen when a child says something a child should not know to say. No one, she said, has ever asked me that, in all my descents. They come and they assume, and they answer the question I did not ask, or they solve the riddle that was only a question in a fine coat. She leaned forward, and the great chair took her weight without a sound. It is a question, small one. There is no trick in the words. The only trick is that most people cannot bear to answer it truthfully, and the floor can taste a lie. Are you ready? Yes. Then here it is. The Sphinx's voice dropped, and the checkered floor seemed to lean in to listen, and the whole quiet room narrowed to the space between the two of them. You have come down 400 floors. You have killed a great many living things and outwitted a great many more. You have found a power waking in you that will make you, in time, a genuinely dangerous person. My question is this. When you reach the bottom, and something in the way you move tells me you will reach the bottom, what will you have become? And is it a thing you would be willing to meet in a mirror? The room waited. The system, for once, printed nothing at all. Harry stood on the line between the black and the white and did not answer quickly, because he understood, with the cold, clear sense the whole tear had sharpened in him, that this was the will they had told him was untested since the top of the Warren, and that a fast answer would be a lie, no matter how true it sounded, because he had not thought about it, and the floor could taste the difference between an answer and an echo. So he thought about the knocking and how he had not gloated and had finished it clean because leaving it to suffer would have been a kind of lie. He thought about the rooted thing on floor 90 that had waited so long for prey that never came, and the ache it had put in him that he'd had no room for. He thought about how he had spent the first hour of having magic taking inventory, instead of getting drunk on it. He thought about the mirrors, and how the thing that had frightened him most was not the reflections that moved wrong, but the possibility that one day, one of them would move wrong and he would like what he saw. "I don't know what I'll become," he said finally, and heard his own voice steady and was glad of it. "That's the honest answer. I'm 10. I don't know who I'll be at the bottom of 1,000 floors any more than I knew who I'd be at the bottom of one." He looked up at her golden eyes. "But I know the thing I'm scared of, and I think that's what you're really asking. I'm scared of getting good at hurting things and starting to like it. I've watched people who like it. I grew up with them. And every floor down here has offered me a chance to become that, a little, and I've said no. Every time. Not because I'm good, I don't think I'm especially good, but because the one thing I decided, way back near the top, is that I don't want to be like them." He was quiet a moment. "So whatever I become at the bottom, I want it to be something that would still say no. If I meet myself in a mirror down there and he stops saying no, then I've lost, even if I've cleared every floor. That's the answer. I don't know what I'll be. I know what I refuse to be." The Sphinx did not move for a long moment. Then she settled back into her chair, and something in her face eased, some tension 1,000 years old, and when she spoke, her voice had changed. "The floor tastes no lie," she said softly. "In all my descents, small one, most who answered spoke of what they would gain: power, mastery, revenge, the respect of those who scorned them. You are the first and longer than I can hold who answered by naming what he would refuse to lose. That is not the answer I was told to require. It is the answer I've been waiting to hear." She rose and spread her great wings, and the checkered floor drank the black out of its squares until it was all white, all passable, the way clear. "Go down, Harry Potter. You asked me whether it was a riddle or a question. Here is one of mine in return, to carry with you because I think you will need it far below. The deepest floors will offer you everything you refused to name wanting. Remember that you refused it here, when refusing was easy. It will not be easy there." Floor 400 cleared, the system printed, and the letters were very quiet. The scanned Tiersban, Will, teted twice and held. Affinity, Awaka, Harry Potter. I have Keppen says in Wanisesh. Tode, for the first time, I have dwitting down what you will not do. It is the longer lish now, it is the longer lish now, and the more dangerous one, and the more yours. The last 50 floors of the tier were a long exhale. The Sphinx's gate had emptied him in a way no piston or riddle had. The emptiness of having said a true thing out loud that he had never said even to himself. The floors from 400 to 450 were gentler for it, or perhaps he only met them gentler. A run of small, clean puzzles that asked for cleverness and not for confession. He solved a 4 that was a single enormous lock and a single enormous key that did not fit, until he understood that the key was meant to be melted and recast, and used a wand to heat the brass slowly without burning himself, and poured it into the lock's own keyhole to take the shape it needed. He solved a floor that was a river of sand pouring endlessly from a hole in the ceiling into a hole in the floor, and a set of vessels of different sizes on a ledge, and a plaque that asked him to measure out a quantity that none of the vessels held, until he saw that the puzzle was the old water jug riddle wearing a coat of falling sand, and filled the large vessel and poured off into the small one and kept what was left, and measured the impossible amount with 2 jugs and patience and the simple refusal to believe that a thing dressed up as strange was actually new. The Athenium, he was learning, loved to put old bones in new skins, and a mind that could see the bones was never quite lost in a room, however strange the room pretended to be. He solved a floor that offered him a shortcut, and that one he remembered longest of the code of floors because it did not test his cleverness but rehearsed his refusal. A door on the left promised in gold letters, "The stair down," and a door on the right promised, "The stair out." A way up, a way home, a way back to the cupboard in the surface, and an end to the descending dark. He stood between them for a while. He was tired. The Sphinx had hollowed him and the mirrors had frightened him, and the smell of nothing but stone and beeswax had been in his nose for 200 floors, and the right-hand door said home, and part of him wanted it. But he had learned in the mirrors to distrust the thing that most drew his eye, and he thought about the warning printed at the bottom of the warren. Retreat is not rewarded, and he understood that a floor which offered escape halfway through a tier was not offering escape at all. It was testing whether he could be bought with the appearance of it. He opened the left-hand door, the honest one, the one that only promised more dark, and behind the right-hand door, when he glanced back, there was no stair out at all, only a mirror, in which a small dark-haired boy stood looking at the choice he had not made. He solved a floor that was a library again, a small one, a coda to the Athenaeum, that asked him to find the one true book among 10,000 lies, and this time he could read enough to do it properly, because somewhere in the tier the reading had come to him the way the magic had, provoked out of him by floors that refused to open for a boy who could not, and he stood in the small library holding the one true book and understood that the Athenaeum had not only tested him, it had taught him. He had come down the golden stair unable to read a paragraph, and he would leave the terror able to read a page, because a place built of words does not let you leave it as illiterate as you came. If you are the kind of person who refuses to be kept, on floor 449, the last before the stair changed again, the system showed him the score, and Harry looked at it a long time. Eentrant, Harry, Dog, Totter. Depth, floor 45D Psychons, Canter, complete. Constitution, tempered, Psychons, Canched, Sempered, Faft. Speed, fast, cunning. Formidable, will, tested twice, and held. Affinity, awake, Euentrain but willing new literacy. Anstein Homberds Ling, new way steracy, acquired the hard way, which is the only way that lasts. That last one isn't a battle stat, Harry said. No, the system agreed. It is better than one, a great many powerful people. Above you cannot do the thing you learn in the necesses. Read a rundin found this fours. Read a room, read a sea, read a thing that does not to be read. You cam down the gold stair. A boy frost, cord barely spell and you leave it a boy frost. Wei Shen thinking straight lines and throat cloaked rooms. I have stopped calling that luck. I stopped a long time ago. Harry stood at the top of the next stair, and this one did not pour gold, and it did not breathe the wet green of the warren. It breathed something else, something that made the hair on his arms rise before he had seen a single step of it. A warm, close, familiar smell. Impossible and specific. The smell of a house at dinner time, of a fire lit in a hearth, of a kitchen where someone was cooking who was glad you were coming home. It was a smell Harry Potter had wanted his whole life and had never once been given. And it was rising up a staircase in a dungeon 450 floors under the earth, and every instinct he had learned in the mirrors told him very quietly to be afraid. The next tier, he said. It was not a question. The next tier does not warrant your body, the system said, and there was something in the letters he had not seen before, something that in a person would have been the wish to soften a blow it could not stop coming. And IT does not want your mind. The Spinchins told you. The deepest floors offer you everything you refused to name wanting. You are about to walk down into the first of them. I cannot fight it for you. I can only keep the score. Go carefully, Harry Potter. Go slowly. And when the floors gave anew, Harry looked down the stair at the warm, rising smell of a life he had never had. And he did not go quickly, and he did not go slowly. He stood there a while. At the top of it, a small boy with a notched blade he would not need and a magic he had barely learned to spend, and he let himself be afraid for exactly as long as it took to decide he would go anyway. Then he went down into the smell of home. Chapter 2. End Chapter 3. A house with his name on it. The stair led him out into a kitchen, and the kitchen was warm, and a woman with dark red hair stood at the stove with her back to him. And she said, without turning, "There you are. Wash your hands. It's nearly ready." And Harry Potter, who had cleared 450 floors and outwitted a sphinx and killed a king, stood on the bottom step and could not make himself move at all. He knew it was a floor. He had never once forgotten it was a floor. The system had told him, and the sphinx had told him, and the sphinx had told him, and the smell rising up the stair had told him before he'd seen a single step. The deepest floors offer you everything you refuse to name wanting. He knew, and the knowing did nothing. Because knowing a thing and standing in a warm kitchen while a woman with your mother's hair tells you to wash your hands are two facts that live in different rooms of a person. And the dungeon had built this floor in the second room, where knowing does not reach. Floor 45 lol of 1000, the system printed. And the letters were small and careful, tucked into the corner of the warm bright room like something that did not want to intrude. Bion, the House of Wance. The third tier does not attack. It welcomes. It has read you down to the flow. I cannot fight this for you. I can only tell you it is a flow, is a floor, and you will Larry know already now, and knowing will not be enough. Go carefully. The woman turned around. She had green eyes, the exact green of the eyes Harry saw in the mended mirror over the bathroom sink at Privet Drive. The eyes Aunt Petunia looked away from. She was younger than he had ever let himself imagine, and there was flour on her wrist, and she smiled at him the way no one had ever smiled at him. As though his coming into a room were a good thing that happened on purpose, and she said, "You've got that look." "What's wrong, love?" Love. He'd been called a great many things in that kitchen-shaped part of his life, and never that. Nothing, Harry heard himself say. His voice came out smaller than he meant. "Sorry, I'll wash my hands." He washed his hands. He did it to buy time, standing at a sink that was warm and clean and had a window over it that looked out on a garden with a swing in it, a garden he had never had, under a sky that was evening and gold and false, and he made himself think while the water ran. This was a floor. It had a stair down, somewhere, and it would not open until he had answered whatever the floor was asking. The floors of the House of Wance did not ask riddles. So what did they ask? The Sphinx's voice came back to him. The deepest floors will offer you everything you refuse to name wanting. Remember that you refused it here when refusing was easy. It will not be easy there. She was asking him to stay. That was the whole of it. There was no puzzle to solve, no monster to outwit. The floor asked one question, and it asked it slowly, warmly, over dinner, and the question was, will you stay? And the trap was that it would never once force him. It would only make leaving the hardest thing he had ever done. A man came in from the garden then, tall, with black hair that stuck up at the back exactly the way Harry's did, and glasses, and he clapped Harry on the shoulder with an easy hand and said, "Budge up, I'm starving," and sat down at a table set for 3, and for one moment, one whole terrible moment, Harry wanted to sit down at that table more than he had ever wanted anything in his life. More than the door in the cupboard, more than any of it. He sat down. He decided, standing at the sink, that he would sit down. Not to stay, but because the fastest way out of a floor was through it, and he could not read a floor he refused to enter. So he sat, and the woman with his mother's hair put a plate in front of him, and the man who wore his father's face passed him the potatoes, and they talked. And Harry listened with the whole of the attention 200 floors of libraries had sharpened in him. Listened for the seam, the flaw, the thing that would tell him what this was and how to leave it. He found the seam on the second evening. Time below is not time above. The House of Wands had days, false gold days, and he let a few of them pass because he had learned in the Athenaeum that a floor guarded a secret best when you were in a hurry and gave it up when you had the patience to wait it out. He ate the dinners. He pushed the swing in the garden. He let the woman with his mother's hair sit on the edge of a bed that was his, in a room that was his, with a window and a shelf of books and a patch of afternoon on the floor, and tell him a story he had never been told, and he lay very still and listened to her voice and did not let himself cry, because crying would have been agreeing, and some careful clerk in the back of him was still keeping the score. The seam was this: they never remembered yesterday. Not exactly. The woman told him the same story on the second evening she had told him on the first, word for word, with the same pause in the same place, the same small laugh at the same line. The man asked him, both mornings, whether he'd slept all right, in the same words, with the same easy hand on his shoulder. They were warm, and they were real to the touch, and they loved him in a way that filled the room. And they were a single day, one perfect golden day, playing over and over, because the floor had only ever been built to hold one day, the one day Harry Potter had wanted his whole life and had never had. It could give him the day. It could not give him a tomorrow, because you cannot build a tomorrow out of a want. A tomorrow is made of 1,000 ordinary days you did not choose, and the floor had never had those to work from. He understood it fully on the third morning, sitting at the table while the man asked him, again in the same words, whether he'd slept all right, and the understanding did not free him. That was the cruelest thing the House of Wands ever did to him, crueler than any pit or blade in the tier above. It let him see the whole mechanism. The loop, the single day worn smooth with repeating, and it did not make him want to leave. He looked at the woman with his mother's hair pouring tea she had poured 100 times, and he knew she was a day, a beautiful trapped day, and he loved her anyway, in the helpless way you love a thing that is kind to you when you have gone your whole life without kindness, and he understood that he could stay here forever inside one golden morning, and it would never once stop being enough, because he had wanted so little for so long that a single day of this was more than he had ever asked. You have gone very quiet, the system printed, and it had never used that many small words before. Herod Potter. I have missed. People reach this floor, not many. The ones which reach it are the ones strong enough to get here and homo enough to want what it offers, and that is a rare and terrible combination, and it is you. Most of them stayed. They are still here, several floors apart, part the East side of the day. The floor did not lead to them, and it is not lying to you. That is why it works. I will not to tell you to leave. I am a lever. I will only ask you one thing, and then I will be it, the woman at the stove. Do you want her, or do you want what she insteading? Harry looked at her for a long time. That's the same question the Sphinx asked, he said quietly. So the false parents would not hear, though he suspected they could not hear anything he did not want them to. What I'll refuse to lose. He put his fork down. His hand was steady. He had made it steady. I want her. That's the honest answer. And the floor can taste a lie, so I won't tell one. I want to stay. I could stay here forever and never once regret it, and that's not the floor tricking me. That's just true. He looked at the window, at the false gold garden, at the swing moving a little in a breeze that came from nowhere. But she isn't my mother. My mother's dead. I don't remember her. I was too small, but I know that much. She's dead. And this isn't her. This is the shape of the hole she left. And if I stay here, I'm not keeping her. I'm keeping the hole. I'm agreeing that the hole is the best I'll ever get. He stood up from the table. His legs did not want to. He made them. And I decided a long time ago I don't agree with the people who tell me what the best I'll ever get is, even when they're kind about it. Especially then. The woman with his mother's hair looked up at him, and for a moment, just a moment, something moved in her false green eyes that was not part of the loop, something that had not been said the first evening or the second, and she said, very softly, in a voice the day had not scripted, "Then go, love. You were always going to. That's how I know you're mine." Harry did cry then. He let himself once, standing in a warm kitchen that would go on being warm after he left it, empty. One golden morning repeating for no one, he wiped his face on his sleeve and did not apologize for it, and he walked to the door under the stairs. Of course there was a door under the stairs. The floor had read him down to the floor of him, and behind it the steps went down into the dark, and he went down them, and did not look back, because looking back was a kind of staying, and he had run out of the particular courage it took to leave twice. Floor 451 cleared. The system printed, when the door had sealed the warm gold light behind him. Will, tested, and held, at a price I have record and will not name Alad. Herfbraus Hermathid, the Onstay were donned. Harry Potter, the Onstay were not twiles cairn you. They, simple wanted, it less, and so it cost them less to stay. You wanted it most, and you left anyway. I have no stat for that. I am inventing one. It will not have a number. The House of Wands had more than one door, and each door had his name on it, and each was worse than the last for being clever about what he wanted. Floor 461 offered him a fortress. He came down into a high stone keep on a hill, walls thick as a man is tall, a single gate that no one could open but him, and from the topmost window he could see for miles in every direction, and nothing could come at him unseen. It was warm inside, and stocked, and safe in a total, permanent, unassailable way that Harry had never once been in his life. Not in the cupboard, not on any floor of the dungeon, not ever. He walked the walls of it and understood the offer completely. It was not love and it was not respect. It was the end of fear. Stay here, the keep said, without words, and nothing will ever hurt you again. No beast, no riddle, no cold-eyed adult, no whispering bench, nothing. You have been afraid every day of your life, small one. Here is a room where the fear stops. And Harry stood on the wall of the fortress that no one could enter, and felt how badly a part of him wanted to lay the fear down. Wanted to be somewhere the trap could never spring, and then he understood the seam of it, which was the same seam as all the others. A place nothing can enter is a place from which nothing can leave. The keep was safe because it was sealed, and sealed was only another word for the cupboard, dressed in stone and given a view. He had not climbed down 1,000 floors to find a bigger cupboard. He had climbed down to stop needing one. Safe isn't the same as free, he said to the empty keep. And he found the gate that only he could open, and he opened it, and he walked out of the safest place he had ever stood, back into the fear, because the fear was the price of going anywhere at all, and he had decided, a long time ago, that he would rather be afraid and moving than safe and kept. Floor 470 did not offer him parents. It had learned, or the tear had learned, that the parents were too obvious, that he had a place in himself braced against exactly that, so it offered him something he had not braced for. It offered him a friend. He came down into an ordinary afternoon, a garden wall, a patch of waste ground behind some houses in a town that was not Little Winging but wanted to be, and a boy about his own age, sitting on the wall who looked up and grinned and said, "Took you long enough," as though they had known each other all their lives. And Harry, who had never once known anyone all his life, who had spent 10 years being a thing other children were warned away from, felt the trap close around him more softly and more completely than the kitchen ever had, because he did not want a mother he could not remember. He wanted, with a plainer and more desperate want, one person his own size who was glad to see him. And here he was, sitting on a wall, saying, "Took you long enough." It took Harry a full false week to leave floor 470, and he was not proud of the week. And the system recorded it without judgment, because a ledger does not judge the weeks a person needs. The friend was clever and funny, and never once cruel, and knew all the things about Harry that Harry had never told anyone, and that last part was the seam in the end. The friend knew too much, knew the inside of Harry, the way only the floor knew it, because the friend was made of the floor's reading of him, was a mirror that had learned to laugh. A real friend would have gotten things wrong. A real friend would have misunderstood him sometimes, would have liked things he did not like, would have surprised him. This boy never surprised him because he was not another person. He was Harry's want for another person, wearing a face. And a want, however warm, is only ever a room with one person in it, dressed up to look like two. He left. It was harder than the kitchen in one way, and easier in another. Harder because he had let himself, for a week, have the thing he had wanted longest, and easier because a friend who never surprised you was, in the end, a lonelier thing than being alone, and Harry had enough practice at being alone to recognize the difference. "You're not real," he said at the door down. And the boy on the wall smiled the smile that was too much his own and said, "No, but the want is. Hold on to the want, Harry. There's a real one up top someday, if you get out of here. Don't let this place teach you to settle for the copy." And Harry went down the stair thinking that the floor had, for one moment, told him the truest thing anyone had said to him in 300 floors, and that this was the most dangerous thing about the House of Wants, that it was not lying. It never lied. It simply offered you a true and beautiful thing that was also a cage, and let you decide each time whether you were the kind of person who could walk out of a cage that had your happiness in it. Floor 512 tried a different key, and it was the one Harry had thought himself proof against, which was how he knew the tear had been paying attention. It did not offer him love. It offered him vindication. He came down into a great hall full of people, warm with candlelight and noise, and every face turned to him as he entered, and they knew his name. Not the way the whispering benches would one day know it, with that awful hunger, but the way you know the name of someone you are simply glad exists. There was a woman who had once been his teacher and had looked through him for a year, and here she was, telling everyone within earshot that she had always known, always seen something in him. There was a heavy-set shape at the edge of the crowd that wanted to be Uncle Vernon and could not quite manage it. Watching with a face that had finally run out of contempt and found only a grudging, frightened respect. Every person who had ever made Harry small stood in that hall and looked at him and understood, at last, that they had been wrong. He walked into the middle of it and let the warmth of being right wash over him, and it was sweeter than the kitchen in a meaner way. He had not known how much he wanted this until it was poured over him. Not to be loved, but to be proven, to make every adult who had ever decided he was nothing stand in a bright room and take it back. He stood there and drank it and understood, slowly, the shape of the seam. None of them were sorry. That was the thing. They admired him now, they applauded him now, but not one of them had come to him back when he was small and cold and forgotten, when admiration would have cost them something and meant everything. They only respected him now that he had climbed 1,000 floors and become someone respect was cheap to give. And Harry, who had learned in the Athenaeum to read what a room was really made of, saw that a hall full of people applauding the strong version of you is not the same as one person being kind to the weak version. And that if he stayed here for the applause, he would be agreeing that the small, cold, forgotten boy had deserved to be forgotten. That he had only become worth loving by becoming powerful. No, he said out loud to the whole bright, grateful hall. You don't get to be right about me now. I was worth something in the cupboard. That's the part you missed, and I'm not going to stand here and let you fix it, because it can't be fixed. It can only be forgiven, and I'll do that on my own time, not yours. And he found the door down at the back of the hall, behind the applause. And he took it, and the warmth closed over an empty room behind him, all those grateful faces clapping for no one. Floor 530 was the one Harry liked least to remember, because it was the one that showed him a version of himself he had not known was in there. It did not offer him love or respect or safety. It offered him the other thing, the thing he had never let himself want in daylight. It offered him back the people who had made him small, and it put them in his power. He came down into the kitchen at number 4, the real one, exact, and there was Uncle Vernon at the table gone suddenly small and gray and frightened, and Aunt Petunia with her hands twisting, and Dudley in the corner, trying to make himself unseen the way Harry had spent 10 years trying to make himself unseen. The whole room understood, in the way of dreams, that the arrangement had reversed, that Harry was the large thing now, and they were the small ones, and that whatever he wanted to do to them, he could. The affinity hummed ready behind his eyes. No one was watching. The House of Wands had emptied the world down to this one kitchen and this one boy and the 3 people who had earned, by any fair reckoning, a great deal of what he could now give them. And Harry stood in the doorway and felt the want rise. Hot and specific and older than the dungeon, the want to make them feel it. Once. All of it. Every cold morning and every locked door and every meal eaten alone in a cupboard. And for one long moment, the floor had him. Because the want was real, and the grievance was just, and there was no one at all, to see. Then he looked at Dudley in the corner, trying to be smaller, and he saw himself, and the whole thing turned over in his hands. This was the floor. Not the wanting was allowed. The wanting was even fair. The floor was the doing. It wanted him to cross the kitchen and become, for one satisfying moment, the large, frightening thing that hurt the small one, because it knew that a person who does that once has changed what he is, and it had been trying since the drowned floors to find the one want strong enough to make him change it. No, Harry said, to the frightened gray shapes of the people who had raised him. And his voice was not kind and it was not cruel. It was only certain. You don't get to make me into you. That's the only thing you could still take from me, and I'm not handing it over. I'm not going to hurt you. Not because you don't deserve it. Maybe you do. I've stopped trying to work out who deserves what, because I've seen what people look like when they enjoy having someone in their power, and I looked at them across a kitchen table for 10 years, and I would rather be anything in the world than that. He turned his back on the whole scene, which was the hardest turning of the tier, harder than the kitchen with his mother in it, and he walked out, and the door down was waiting, and the floor let him go the way it always did, because it had never once been able to make him do anything. It could only ever ask. No one was watching, the system said very quietly, and you had them and you let them go. Harry Potter, the floor above offered you being Love, and this one offered you being Flove, and this one offered you being feared, and of the two I do not now, which is the harder to refuse for a shilly which has had neither. I am writing it down. The tier changed around 455 ace, the way the library had changed to clockwork, and it changed into water. Bielm reshift, the drowned F floors. The system printed, and the warm gold of the House of Wands gave way to a cold blue-green light, and the sound of water everywhere, above and below. The house offered you what you want. These floors offer you what you have lost, and ask whether you can. The first was about desire. This is about grief. They are not the same test. Though the unpractic had confused them. The drowned floors were a town underwater, not flooded, drowned. A whole town sunk entire, streets and houses and shops standing intact beneath a green weight of water through which Harry could somehow walk and breathe, the affinity in him having quietly decided somewhere in the crossing that he would not drown here unless he agreed to, and Harry having quietly decided he would not agree. He walked drowned streets in a silence so total it had a pressure to it, past windows behind which the furniture of drowned lives stood undisturbed. A clock on a mantel, a chair pulled out from a table, a child's shoe on a stair, and the floor asked him nothing at all, at first, which he had learned to distrust more than any question. The question, when it came, was his own memory, and it came dressed as a street. He turned a corner on floor 560 and the street was Privet Drive. Not a copy of it, not a want-shaped version. The real thing. Exact, down to the crack in the pavement where he had once fallen and split his lip and been told it was his own fault. Down to the hedge Uncle Vernon trimmed with a fury that had always frightened him more than shouting would have. And there, at the end of it, was number 4. And the cupboard. And the whole shape of the 10 years he had climbed down 1,000 floors to get away from. The drowned water pressed cold and green over all of it, and the house stood quiet and true, and Harry understood that this floor was not asking him to want it. It was asking him whether he could look at it. Many, 20 coal reach the drowned froze cannot, the system said. They have can so far to escape a thing that they cannot bear to see its standing hole. The floor does not punish them for turning away. It simply does not open, and they wander the drowned streets, looking for a drown, streets looking for a door that will only appertimate to someone who has stopped it running. What will you do, Harry Potter? Harry walked down Privet Drive. He walked the length of the drowned street to number 4 and stood in front of the door he had opened 10,000 times with dread in his stomach. And he made himself look at it, all of it, the cupboard he could see through the front window. Small and dark under the stairs. The place where he had slept and been forgotten and been small. He did not hate it, which surprised him. He had expected to hate it. But he had come a long way from it. 450 floors and awoken magic in a sphinx satisfied in a golden morning he had walked out of, and from where he stood now, the house was not a monster. It was just a house, where a boy had been treated badly by people too frightened of him to be kind, and the boy had survived it, and had gone somewhere they could never follow, and did not need to burn the house down or weep over it or pretend it did not haven't. He only needed to see it and set it down and walk on. It happened, Harry said out loud, to the drowned street, to the cupboard, to the 10 years. It was real and it was bad, and I'm not going to pretend it wasn't, because pretending would be a lie, and I've stopped telling those. He put his hand flat on the cold front door, the way he had put it to a seam of light 1,000 floors ago, and he felt the whole house settle under his palm. Not vanish, not shatter, just settle, the way a thing settles when it has finally been looked at and does not have to keep shouting to be seen. But it doesn't own me. I climbed out. I'm not in the cupboard. I'm here. And the door under his hand became a door down, the drowned street folding gently away behind it, and Harry went down into deeper water with the strangest sensation he had felt in the whole descent, lighter, as though he had been carrying the house on his back for 400 floors and had just, for the first time, been allowed to put it down. The drowned floors gave him back things he had lost that he had not known he was still carrying, and each one asked the same thing in a different voice. Can you hold this without drowning in it? 4573 was a lullaby. He heard it before he saw the room. A woman's voice, low and unhurried, singing something with no words he could catch, drifting up a drowned stair, and his feet had carried him toward it before his mind had voted on the matter. The room at the top was a nursery, drowned like all the rest. A cot and a mobile turning slowly in the green water, and the voice came from nowhere and everywhere. The voice of someone who had sung to him once, in the 1 year he could not remember. Our Harry, 1 year. He stood in the drowned nursery and let the song go through him, and it was almost the worst thing the tear had done. Worse than the kitchen, because the kitchen he could see and argue with, and this was only a voice, a thing with no face to leave, no door to walk out of, only a sound that wanted him to lie down in the drowned cot and be small and cared for, and never rise. And the floor did not open, because there was nothing here to solve and no one here to refuse. There was only the song and the choice, made moment to moment, to keep standing. He kept standing. He listened to the whole of it, and he did not lie down, and when it ended he said, quietly, to the empty water, "Thank you," which surprised him, because he had expected to say goodbye. But the song had not asked him to stay, not really. It had only reminded him that he had once been sung to, that it had been real, that the hole had a shape because something warm had once filled it. He carried the thanks down the stair the way he would later carry the photograph. And the door opened for a boy who had been given a thing and had not tried to keep it past its ending. Floor 590 was the hardest, and it was a photograph. He found it in a drowned house, a single framed picture on a mantel, and in it 2 people stood laughing with a baby between them. The man with the hair that stuck up, and the woman with the dark red hair. Younger even than the kitchen had made them, and the baby was him. And on the back, in handwriting he had never seen and knew at once, someone had written a date and 3 names and the words, Our Harry, 1 year. He He sat down on the drowned floor of the drowned house and held the photograph, and the water pressed cold and green around him, and this was not a want and not a memory, because he had no memory of it. It was a fact, the plain, unbearable fact, that there had been a year, 1 year in which he had been our Harry, held and named and loved, before the world took it, and he had never known it because he had been too small to keep it. He held the photograph a long time. The floor did not hurry him, and in the end, he did not leave it on the mantel, and he did not clutch it to his chest and refuse to move. He did the third thing, the hard thing the drowned floors had been teaching him. He tucked it carefully inside his shirt, against the duskweave cloak, and he stood up, and he carried it down, because grief, he was working out, was not a thing you got rid of and not a thing you drowned in. It was a thing you carried, if you were strong enough, the way he had carried the Warren Fang in the cloak, a weight you learned to move under, that made you heavier and also, somehow, more real. You kept it, the system said, and the letters were very quiet. Most leave it. Because carrying it, a evebu este wit it and never rise. You did the thing a most no one does. You picked up the W meath and kept walking. Harried Potter. Hurried Potter? I have been a ledger for a long time, and I am going to stelm and I am going to sting that is not on any ledger. The deepest floors of this dungeon were not built to mate. The reekest floors of this dungeon were not built to make you wrong. Strength was the first 200. Cleverness was the second. These floors were built to make you someone weshin. I do not yet now if you can be. But you carried the photograph. That is the first good sign I have seen that you might. Floor 6711 gave him a companion, and then asked him to leave it, and it was the drowned floor's gentlest cruelty. He came into a sunken courtyard and found, sheltering under a drowned archway, a small living thing. Not a beast, not a lure. Only a creature the size of a cat, pale and shivering and lost, that flinched when he came near. And then, when he crouched and waited and did not grab, crept to him, and pressed against his side as though it had been waiting 100 years for someone who would not hurt it. It followed him. Through 3 floors it followed him, and Harry, who had watched 600 floors alone, found that he talked to it, told it things, kept half his attention always on where it was, and understood without letting himself dwell on it that he had been lonelier than he'd known. And then came a floor with a gap the little thing could not cross, a drowned chasm too wide for its small legs, and the stair beyond it, and the plaque, the way down it's his yours alone. Harry stood at the edge a long time. He could have tried to carry it, the affinity might have floated it across, but he understood what the floor was truly asking, which was not whether he could bring the creature, but whether he could bear to be given something and then made to leave it. The thing the whole tier had been teaching him since the kitchen, the difference between loving a thing and needing to keep it. He knelt and held the small, warm, shivering creature one last time, and he did not carry it across, and he did not pretend it did not matter. He set it down gently on the safe side, facing back the way they'd come, toward the shallower floors where a lost thing might live, and he said, "Go on, not everything's mine to keep. That's all right. You were real while you were here, and that counts, even if it ends." And he crossed the gap alone and did not look back, because he had learned that looking back was a kind of staying, and the door down opened for a boy who could love a thing and still let it go. The drowned floors asked him one more thing before the gate, and it was the question the whole tier had been circling, put at last in plain water. On floor 640, he came into a drowned square with a single figure kneeling at the center of it, bound, head down, and as he came closer he saw that it was a beast, one of the pale shelled things from the deep warren, or its cousin, the kind that had snapped his first knife and driven him to the edge of a drop. It was wounded and tangled in a net of drowned weed, and it could not free itself. And when it heard him, it turned its blind head toward the sound the way the mother of the deep's children had turned, helpless and hungry and afraid. A stone tablet stood before it, and on the tablet were carved 2 words, and the 2 words were kill or free, and beneath them, smaller, "This one would have eaten. It will remember neither your mercy nor your cruelty, nor your cruelty. No one is watching. Choose." Harry stood over the bound thing for a long while. It would have eaten him, that was true. It would not thank him, that was true. There was no reward carved on the tablet for freeing it, and no punishment for killing it, and the system, for once, said nothing at all, which told him the floor had asked it not to. No one is watching. And he understood that this was the whole of the test, stripped of every consolation, not what he would do when it earned him something, not what he would do when someone was keeping the score, but what he would do in a drowned square at the bottom of the world with no one watching and nothing to gain, and a helpless thing that would never know his name. He knelt down in the cold green water beside the beast that would have eaten him, and he did not kill it, and he did not free it to prove anything because there was no one to prove it to. He freed it because leaving a bound thing to drown was a kind of lie, the same lie he had refused to tell the Gnaw King, and he had decided 1,000 floors ago which lies he would not tell, and the decision did not stop applying just because it had gone dark and quiet and no one would ever check. He cut the drowned weed with the Warren Fang, and the pale thing thrashed free and fled into the green dark without a backward glance, exactly as the tablet had promised, remembering nothing, And Harry knelt there alone in the empty square and felt no triumph, and expected none. And the door down opened anyway, quietly, for a boy who had done a kind thing in the dark for no reason but that he was the kind of person who did. No one was watching, the system said, when the drowned square was behind him, and its voice was so quiet the letters barely lit. Except that I was, because I am always watching. And I had been told to save nothing, and so I sat nothing, and I might you free. A thing that would have killed you free, a thing that would have killed you for nothing. In the dat. Harry Potter. The floor that tests you when no one is watching is the only floor that ever tells the truth about a person. You have just told it. I have written it down in the ledger that has no numbers. IT is nearly the only thing in that book now, and it is enough. The gate of the third tier was floor 700, and it did not offer him anything, and it did not take anything, and it was the most frightening floor he had cleared since the cupboard, because it was himself. He came down a long stair into a round room of gray stone, plain, empty, lit by a light that came from nowhere, and in the center of the room stood a boy. The boy was his height. The boy had his hair and his glasses, taped to the corner, and his eyes, and the dusk-weave cloak on his shoulders, and the Warrenfang at his hip, and a photograph tucked inside his shirt. And the boy looked at Harry across the gray room with a face Harry knew better than any face in the world and liked less than most, because it was the face he had never quite been able to see, his own. The warden of the third tier, the system printed. Floor 700 of 1,000. The mirrors were 700 at threes. The house of once Risha des. Every floor since of 450 has been Rishan Singh. He is not a copy and he is not a Lee. He is what you would have Buckham if you had Sockham, if you had said yes to any of the things you said no to. Harry is the Harry who stayed. You cannot walk around him. You must get past him, and he can knows everything you know, and he wants everything you rary, you refist. The other Harry smiled, and it was the smile from the mirrors, the one that was too much his own, and he said, in Harry's own voice, "You've come a long way to meet the version of you that's happy." "You're not happy," Harry said. "No," the other agreed easily, "but I'm not tired either, and I'm not carrying a dead woman's photograph inside my shirt, and I'm not about to walk down into whatever's at the bottom of this place all alone with nothing but a knife and a bad case of principles." I stayed in the kitchen. I sat down at the table. I said yes. He spread his hands. "And I'm you, Harry, exactly you, right up until the moment you left, and I didn't. So here's the floor. Here's the whole floor. You have to convince me to move, and I'm you, which means I know every argument you've got because I've had every one of them, and I stayed anyway. Go on. Tell me why leaving was worth it. Tell me why the cupboard and the loneliness and the long climb down was better than a warm kitchen and a mother who calls you love. Tell yourself. I'm listening. I've got all the time in the world. That's rather the point of me." For a moment Harry did not have an answer, and the moment stretched, and the other boy watched him with his own patient eyes and did not press, because he did not need to. He only had to wait, and let the silence do the work, the way the kitchen had let the warmth do it. Everything the other Harry had said was true. That was the horror of the floor and the honesty of it both. Leaving had been madness. He had given up the only good day he might ever be handed, and traded it for cold stone and a long dark and no promise at all that the bottom held anything but more dark. Standing in the gray room, tired to the bone, 300 floors still below him, Harry felt the whole weight of the descent settle on him at once, and for one breath he wanted nothing in the world so much as to sit down against the wall beside himself and stop. And Harry understood that this was the will, tested for the last time in the tier, and that there was no clever trick for it. No rhythm to count, no seam to find, because the thing across the room was not a lock or a beast or a lie. It was the truest argument he had ever faced, made in his own voice by the part of himself that had wanted to stay, the part that was still, this very moment, whispering that the other Harry was right, that leaving had been a kind of madness, that a warm kitchen was worth more than any bottom of any dungeon. He did not answer quickly. He had learned that much from the Sphinx. "You're right that I know every argument you know," Harry said at last, "so I won't pretend I can out-argue you. You just have the counter, because you're me, and I'd have the counter to that, and we'd stand here until the water came up, both of us right, forever. That's the trap. You're not asking me to win. You're asking me to prove that leaving was worth it, and I can't prove that because I don't know yet. Maybe it wasn't. Maybe the bottom of this place is nothing, and I gave up the only good day I'll ever get for a hole in the ground." He took a step toward himself. "But here's the thing you can't argue me out of, because you gave it up and I didn't. I'd rather not know and keep going than know for certain and stop. You picked certain. You picked the day you understood all the way down, the one that never surprises you, the loop. And I would rather have one real tomorrow I can't predict than 1,000 perfect todays I've already seen the end of." He was close now. Close enough to see his own taped glasses in the other boy's eyes. "That's not an argument. You're right that it's not an argument. It's just what I want more, and you can't want it for me, because you already chose the other thing. So I'm not going to convince you to move. I'm going to walk past you and you're going to let me, because deep down you already know which one of us is the real one. The one who's still going, or the one who's still going, or the one who's stopped. The other Harry looked at him for a long moment, and then, slowly, he smiled again. And this time, the smile was not too much his own. This time, it was just a boy's smile, tired and honest, and he stepped aside. "Yeah," said the Harry who had stayed. "I know." He stood back against the gray wall and let the way open, and as Harry passed him, he said, quietly, "One last thing. The bottom had better be worth it, for both of us. I'll be here, in the room where you left me, being the day you didn't take. Make it worth it." And Harry, walking past himself toward the stair down, said the only true thing he had left, which was, "I will," and did not look back because he had learned on the kitchen floor that looking back was a kind of staying, and he had one tear left in him and could not afford to spend the courage twice. Fluor 700 cleared, the system printed, and for a long moment printed nothing else, and then, will, tested, and held. Twirl the fleur the plur that breaks everyone. 300 floors remain. I have stopped keeping the score of what you can do of what you can do, because it no longer matters as much as the other ledger, the one I started the Sphinx Gate, the ledger of what you will not do. It is the longer book now. You have refused a kingdom and a kitchen and a friend and a ration and your own happiness, and you have Keppings Commodervate by Dead Woman's photograph, and you have put Dav Boven's photograph, and you have put down a Fedon, town o' house, you card for it for send, and you have walked and paid in, you have wronged in the origin of you we. I do not now what waits at the bottom. That is true. I am a ledger of the floors, not their architect. Buju, why will tell you this, and it is the last thing I will say before the final tears. Whatever made this place made it for someone. And after 700 floors of watching you refuse everything easy, I am beginning to think it made it for. Harry stood at the top of the last stair of the third tier with a photograph against his chest and a dead woman's handwriting warm through his shirt, and below him the light was not gold and not blue-green and not the wet green of the Warren. It was white, a hard, clean, enormous white, the white of a thing with no shadows in it, the white of a place that had stopped pretending to be anywhere at all. "What's down there?" he asked. "War," said the system simply. "The last tires before the bottom do not ask where's. The way are Gordians, Harry Potter, 9 of them and worse, and they have them and worse day. And they have been waiting a long time for someone to reach them, and they are not sentiments, and they are not have linger motto, and they are not kent, and they will not let you sit down. You have the staringth from the Warren, and the cleverness from the Athen, this cleverness in Ahim, and now the thing the house of Wance forged in you, the thing with no murmur. You will need all three. Go down." And Harry, the letters paused, an unheard of thing. Carry the photograph somewhere the fighting cannot reach it. You will want it the bottom. I do not know why I know that. I only know that Harry moved the photograph to the inside pocket of the duskweave cloak, where the silence of 100 floors would keep it safe, and he drew the Warren Fang, and he looked down the white stair at the war waiting for him, 10 years old, 300 floors from the bottom of the world, carrying everything he had refused to lose. He did not go quickly, and he did not go slowly. He went the way he had learned to go, with the fear in his hand where he could see it, and the photograph over his heart where the fighting could not reach it, and one foot in front of the other, down. Then he went down into the white. Chapter 3. End Chapter 4. The 9 who were told to stop him. The white had no walls, and that was the first thing it used against him. Harry came off the last step of the third tier, and there was no room, no ceiling, no floor. He could see the edge of, only white, a hard, clean, endless white in every direction, so that he stood on nothing, over nothing, under nothing, and his own body was the only dark thing in a world with no shadows in it. Sound did not echo here. His footstep landed and died. Even the Warren Fang, drawn, gave off no gleam, because there was no light to gleam with. The white was simply everywhere, sourceless, and it made him feel like a smudge someone had left on a clean page and would shortly wipe away. Biomi, the Ascendant, the system printed, and the letters black on white were the only clean thing to look at. Floors 71-20-50. The final guarded tire. There are no puzzles here, Harry Potter, there cordas, and no kitchens, and no bastes that merely want to eat you. Terrar 9 wardens. They were made by the architect of this place. Each out of this place, each out of a single EAD, each to stop exactly one kind of person from reaching the bottom. You have been 3 kinds of person on your way down. Strong, Slever, and Way. The wardens are made to stop each of thust, and the combinations. They will come harsh, the will not wait long between, and they do not sit down. How much rest do I get? Harry asked. He was tired. He had been tired since the drowned floors, a tiredness the pale bread of the cleared floors filled his stomach against but could not reach. Less than you want and more than they would like. The architect was not merciful, but the architect was fair, and fair means you will have time to bind a wound and catch a breath before the next one and clutch a breath before the next one. The wardens do not tear. You do. That is the wall of this tier in one sentence. You must win 9's Out of the white, a shape resolved. It walked toward him from a distance, the white made impossible to judge, and it did not hurry, and as it came close, Harry saw that it was a man in gray armor, plain and perfect, with a plain and perfect sword, and no face behind the visor, only more white. It stopped a duelist's distance away and lifted the sword in a salute so correct it was almost an insult, and Harry understood, before the system named it, that this was a thing that had been made to do one thing supremely well. The first warden, Iron, said the system. He is the answer to strength and skill at arm, has no magic, has no tricks, has nobly the finest swordsman that can bits, swordsman that can be imagined, and he has been standing in this white waiting to prove it and sinned in this white waiting to prove it since Barrier Grandipert. You cannot beat him with the blade. He is betten third hand you will ever be. It is his entire definition. Harry believed it at once. He had learned to read a fighter the way he read a room, and everything about the Iron Warden's stance, the economy of it, the way the sword hung ready without effort, the perfect stillness, told him that a straight contest of skill would last exactly as long as it took the Warden to decide to end it. He was 10 years old with a notched blade and a body that, however tempered by the Warren, had been a swordsman for less than a year. The Warden had been the platonic idea of a swordsman since before living memory. So Harry did not fight the swordsman. He fought the definition. He had noticed something in the salute, and in the way the Warden waited. The Iron Warden did nothing that was not correct. It saluted before engaging. It held its distance until Harry moved. It answered technique with technique, precisely, beautifully, and it did not, would not, could not do anything ugly because it had been made out of the single idea of martial perfection, and there is nothing perfect about fighting dirty. Harry tested it twice, quick probing attacks, and both times the Warden answered with a textbook parry and a textbook riposte, then Harry only barely turned aside, and both times the Warden reset to its perfect distance and waited, correct, for him to try again. It was fighting a duel. Harry was not going to fight a duel. He threw white in its face. There was no dust here, no grit, but there was the duskweave cloak, and Harry swept it off his shoulders and flung it, a sheet of woven silence, across the Warden's visor. Not to blind it, the cloak was too light to stay, but to make it do something. To force the perfect duelist to react to a thing that was not technique, and in the half-second the Warden's blade came up to bat the cloak aside. A correct and elegant motion answering an incorrect and graceless attack. Harry was not where a duelist should be. He was on the ground, low, beneath the arc of that perfect sword, driving the Warnfang up under the gray armor skirt into the join behind the knee, the place no salute defends, the place the idea of perfect swordsmanship does not deign to protect, because a perfect swordsman is never allowed to get there. The Iron Warden went down on the ruined knee, and it did not cry out, because it had no voice, and it looked at Harry with the white where its face should have been, and it saluted him again, the same correct salute, and dissolved into the white it was made of. Floor 701 sleared. The system printed. You did not outfence him. You bid not outfence while you did something ill. The Iron Warden has stopped every swordsman we has ever ween have, ever reached him, because swordsmen fight him with swords. You fucking him with a cloak and the ground. One down, done none celebrate. Storm was faster than him. Storm was faster than anything. The second Warden did not walk out of the white. It arrived, a crack and a smell of scorched air and a figure already standing where none had been, wreathed in a blue-white light that hurt to look at. And before Harry had finished registering it, the Warden had crossed the distance between them and struck, and Harry was only alive because the Warden had taught his body to move before his mind had voted, and the drowned floors had taught him to trust the flinch. He was already falling sideways when the blow landed where he had been, and the white where he had been stood scorched, and the Storm Warden was gone again, arrived again, elsewhere, circling at a speed that turned it into a smear of blue light. He could not dodge it twice. He had barely dodged it once. It was faster than his eyes, faster than the count he kept in his head, and the system's readout was grim and short. Storm is the answer to speed. It is faster tan, you can never be. You cannot outrun it and you cannot outrelent. He did the thing that had beaten the knocking 1,000 years ago and 800 floors up. When a thing is faster and stronger, do not race it. Make it come to you, on ground of your choosing, into a shape it cannot see. But there was no ground here, no pillars, no soft gravel, no drop. Only white, featureless, in every direction, nothing to build a trap out of. Nothing except the Warden's own speed. He watched it move. Smears of blue, arriving and gone, and he made himself see not the Warden, but the pattern of the Warden. The way he had built the invisible beast on floor 94 out of the sounds it made. Storm was faster than his eyes, but it was not random. It struck and vanished and re-arrived to strike from a new angle, always circling, and each strike came a fixed beat after the last, because even lightning has a rhythm if you stop trying to watch it and start trying to hear it. Harry shut his eyes. In a world of blinding white, with an enemy made of light, he shut his eyes and stopped looking, and listened to the crack and scorch of each arrival, and counted, and found the beat, and found, in the beat, the one thing speed cannot change, to strike him from a new angle each time. The Storm Warden had to pass through the point exactly opposite its last strike, every time, because that was the geometry of circling a still target. It was fast. It was not free. Its speed forced it onto a track, and the track was a circle, and a circle has a center, and Harry was standing in it. He did not try to hit the Warden. He could never hit the Warden. He waited, eyes shut, counting the beat, and at the instant the pattern said the storm was passing through the point behind him, arriving to strike his back, Harry did not turn to face it. He thrust the Warren Fang backward, blind, into the place the rhythm promised the Warden would be, exactly as he had done to the thing in the forest of standing stones, and Storm, moving too fast to stop, arriving too committed to swerve, ran itself onto the notched blade at a speed that did most of the work. The blue-white light guttered. The Storm Warden stood impaled on a blind thrust, its terrible speed betrayed into a fixed and fatal track by its own geometry, and it flickered, and went out, and was white again. Flo R72 Slarid, the system printed, and there was something almost unsettled in the letters. You closed your E-What's against a creature of light. Storm has never lost. Storm did not know how to lost, the same way the G Neek and Dunturd. You have now beaten the fastest and the most skilled thens in this tier in the space of a hair. I would tell you to rest, but Stone is coming in, and Stone will not let you. Stone did not attack. Stone could not be attacked. That was the whole problem of the third Warden, and it was the opposite problem of Storm. And Harry understood that the tier was not a ladder of harder and harder versions of the same fight. It was a gauntlet of fights that had nothing in common but the goal of stopping him. The Stone Warden rose out of the white like a mountain, deciding to stand. A vast figure of gray rock, and it did not move toward him, and it did not strike. And when Harry, testing, threw a wand at it, a hard shove of the affinity, enough to have flung a beast off its feet in the warren, the force broke against the Stone Warden like a wave against a cliff and did nothing at all. He tried the Warren Fang against its leg in the notched blade, skated off rock without leaving a mark. He tried fire, a wand of flame across the whole gray bulk of it, and the fire washed over Stone and guttered, and the Warden stood, patient, immense, unbothered. Stone is the answer to Fornt, the system said. Everything you have, your thing, you have your faith, and your wraith, your blade, your affinity, is Fornt, and Stone eats Fornt, and Stone eats Fornt. It will not attack you. It does not need to. This floor does not open until the Warden is down, and the Warden cannot be Canox down, and you have a Bodden cannot down, and you have a body that tires and it does not. Stone wins by outlasting. Most Wies Rachets Van Themseldes against the Mensel Vies against a Tuntel. They have nothing left, and then Stone simply stecks on them. What will you do? Harry sat down. Not the way he had sat before the knocking that had been a trap, a lure. This was a boy who had understood a problem and refused to waste himself on the wrong solution. He sat down in the white in front of the mountain and he looked at it. And he thought, while it stood there being unbreakable, and he did not throw a single further want at it, because throwing force at Stone was precisely what Stone was built to receive. A thing that cannot be broken, he thought. A thing that eats force. But it had risen out of the white, it had moved once to stand up. It had weight. It stood on the white the way anything with weight stands on the ground. And Harry had spent 100 floors of the Deep Warren learning that some enemies are not solved by the weapon in your hand but by the room around them. And he had put a shelled beast over a drop by understanding that a thing too heavy and too certain will go where the floor sends it. The Stone Warden was the heaviest, most certain thing he had ever faced. He did not need to break it. He needed the floor to stop holding it up. There was no floor here. There was white. But the white was a thing the affinity could touch. He had walked on it, hadn't he? It bore his weight. It was as real as any floor. And Harry did not throw his wand at the Warden at all. He threw it at the white beneath the Warden, under those vast gray feet, and he did not push up, the way he tried to shove the mountain. He pulled down, opened the white, willed a hole into the featureless floor of the world, directly beneath a thing that weighed more than a house and could not fly, and could not be knocked over but could, like anything with weight, fall. The Stone Warden dropped through the floor of the white. It made no sound and it did not struggle because there was nothing to struggle against. It simply fell. All its unbreakable weight turned from a defense into a sentence, down into a hole that closed over the top of it, and the white was empty, and the floor opened. Floor 703 cleared, the system printed, and this time it took a moment before it went on. You did not attack Stone. You attacked the assumption that something unbreakable is something unbeatable. Harry Potter, 3 Wardens have fallen, and each was built to be the perfect answer to a different strength of yours, and you beat each by refusing to fight it with the strength it was built to answer. I am going to say something I have never said. The architect made the Wargens to stop curtain kens of person. The architect did not make one to stop your kind. I do not think the architect The tier gave him a landing then, a stretch of quiet white between the third warden and the fourth, and Harry used it the way the Warren had taught him to use the safe pockets between floors. Not to celebrate, but to take stock of the machine that was himself. He sat in the white and catalogued the damage. A shallow cut along his ribs from Iron's one true ripost, closed now to a hotline. A scorch across his forearm from Storm's near miss, the skin gone tight and shiny. A deep, dragging tiredness in the affinity, which he had spent hard against stone, willing a hole into the floor of the world. He counted his reserves the way he had counted platforms and blades, honestly, without flattering himself, and the count was not good. 3 wardens down and 6 to go and a gate after that, and he was already running low on the one currency the tier could not refill for him, which was himself. The architect left ye. You thandins on purpose, the system said into the quiet. Not as mercy, as instruction. Tier is tighter knew the last lesson the Others did not, that a long fight is not won by the hardest blow but by the wisest budget. You learned the vault never to spend the last they're severed the last third. You are about to learn why she made you learn it. The wardens ahead will e-sex try to make you spend everything at ons. Sinks Tom and Sech. Do not. Whatever its costs us hold back, because the one after this one is Aber. Sis one is Halbing, and the gate is always after that. Harry bound the cut along his ribs with a strip torn from what was left of his shirt, and he made himself eat, and he made himself breathe, and he did not stand until his hands were steady, because a shaking hand had nearly cost him on floor 31, and he was 900 floors past letting it cost him now. Then he stood, on legs that had carried him down the whole of the world, and he faced the empty white where the fourth warden would rise, and he waited for it the way he had learned to wait for everything down here, without flinching, and without hurry, and with something held back. The middle wardens came faster and stranger, and the tiredness began to win. Flame was the fourth, and Flame was overwhelming. Not fast like Storm, not immovable like stone, but vast and total. It did not come at him as a figure. It came as a weather, a wall of fire that rose out of the white and rolled toward him, filling the whole world edge to edge, a thing that did not need to be accurate because there was nowhere it was not. Harry ran and the fire was ahead of him. He dodged, and the fire had no flank to dodge. He threw a wand of his own flame at it, absurdly, and his fire vanished into its fire like a candle handed to the sun. There was no outthinking a thing with no shape, no reading a room that was on fire in every direction, and for a few seconds the fourth warden very nearly won by the simple fact of being too big to fight. Then Harry stopped looking at the fire and started thinking about it. Fire was the one enemy in the tier he actually knew something about, because he had made it on floor 238 with a wand and a candle, and the thing he knew about fire, the thing every wand had taught him, was that it did not burn on nothing. It needed air. The flame warden was vast and total, and everywhere it burned it was spending the air it burned in, which meant the affinity that could make a flame could also, turned around, unmake the thing a flame lived on. Harry did not throw fire at the fire. He reached into a pocket of the white directly around his own body, and he pulled the air out of it, emptied it, willed a small dead calm into being in the heart of the inferno, a bubble of nothing where fire had nothing to eat. The wall of flame swept over him, and found, at his center, a place it could not burn, and it guttered there, starved, curling back from the airless dark he had made, and Harry stood in the eye of a fire that filled the world and could not touch him. It cost him everything. Holding the calm was not like lighting a candle. It was like holding a door shut against a flood, and it took the last third he had sworn since the vault he would never spend, and more. When the flame warden finally starved and thinned and went out, the white came back cool and empty, and Harry went out with it, down onto his knees and then his side, gray and shaking and scraped clean of every want, the affinity behind his eyes gone dark as a spent match. He lay in the white a long time. The tier, fair as the system had promised and no fairer, let him lie there and gave him time to bind the burn along his forearm where the fire had found the edge of the calm, and time to breathe and time to be afraid in the honest animal way of a body that had spent past its limit. There was not enough time. He knew it was not enough. But it was what fair meant here, and he took it, and when the fifth warden began to rise out of the white he made himself stand to meet it, on legs that did not want him to. Echo was the fifth, and Echo nearly finished him, because Echo was himself. It rose out of the white wearing his face and his cloak and his blade, and it moved when he moved, struck when he struck, and every clever thing he tried it did back to him a half instant later, because it was made of his own tactics turned around. He threw the cloak, it threw the cloak. He went low, it went low. He reached for a want, it reached for a want, and the two forces met in the white and cancelled and left him emptier. The mirror floors had rehearsed this, and the gate of the third tier had rehearsed this, and Harry, on his knees and exhausted and looking at a fresh, unwearied copy of himself, understood that he could not beat Echo by being cleverer, because Echo was exactly as clever as he was and was not tired. So he did the one thing Echo could not copy. He did something that only worked because he was the tired one. He fainted, a want he did not have the strength to complete. He reached, visibly, for the affinity, telegraphed it. began the pull of a great force he no longer had the reserve to finish, and Echo, being his mirror, reached to match it, committed its own reserve to answer a strength Harry was only pretending to spend, and in the instant Echo poured itself into countering an attack that was never coming. Harry, who had kept back one last honest scrap of will, precisely because he had spent everything else and knew exactly how little he had left, put that last real scrap not into force but into the Warren Fang, into a single true thrust while his mirror was braced against a lie. Echo could copy his cleverness. It could not copy his exhaustion, and so it could not imagine that he would bluff with an empty hand, because it did not know its own hand was empty too. The blade went home. His own face looked back at him and dissolved. Flow 705 cleared. The system printed, and Harry was too tired to read it standing and read it lying down. You beat yourself by being the one of you and yours. Wuz Kernui was bluffing. 5 down. Harry Potter, you are hurt and you are impety and the Wraith think there are forward wardens. Left and then a gate. I cannot rest you. I can only tell you that the hardest 5 are behind you, and that this is true, and that it will not feel true. Because of what comes next. What came next was silence, and silence took his magic away. The 6th warden was a thin gray figure that made no sound and cast, impossibly, a shadow, the only shadow in the whole white tier. And where its shadow fell, the affinity did not work. Harry knew at the moment the warden's shadow touched him because the constant low hum of the thing behind his eyes, the reaching thing, the want, simply switched off, went dead and cold and absent, and for the first time since floor 238 he was only a boy with a knife. He almost panicked. He had leaned on the affinity so heavily through the ascendant that its sudden absence was like reaching for a stair that was not there. But the panic lasted only a breath, because underneath it was a truth the whole descent had built. He had cleared 200 floors of the Warren before the affinity ever woke, with nothing but a body and a knife and a mind, and the mind still worked. The mind always worked. The mind always worked. The mind was the one thing no warden had yet found a way to switch off. Silence is the answer to the affinity, the system said. Within its show, within its shadow you have no magic at all. Most WHU reach silence have come to depend on their power so entirely that without it they are nothing, and silence harves them. You are not most. You spent 200 floors being nothing but a clever boy in the deck. Remember how. Harry remembered how. He gave ground deliberately, drawing the silence warden after him, and he watched its one impossible shadow, and he saw that the shadow fell in a direction. That the warden, casting the only shadow in a world of no light, threw that shadow the way a thing throws a shadow away from a source, and that meant, in a world with no light, the warden was its own source, and its shadow always pointed directly away from it, which meant that the one place the affinity-killing shadow never fell was the ground directly beneath the warden itself. The way the base of a lamp is the one dark spot in a lit room. Harry stopped giving ground. He drove straight into the warden, closer than its shadow could reach, into the small bright island of unshadowed white at its very feet. And there, a handspan from the gray figure, with the shadow thrown out all around him but not on him, the hum came back behind his eyes. The affinity woke, and Harry put a single hard want directly into the silence warden, from a range of inches, the whole of what little he had left, and the thing that ate magic came apart because it had never once spot its own nature left uncovered. Floor 706 cleared, the system printed. SIX, you found the dark at the foot of the lamp. Harry Potter, I have stopped a dogen, you will reach the chicks to gate. I have begged dogen whether the archit Katin. I have begged dogen whether the architect knew what it was building a door for. Harry sat in the white and let himself understand, for a moment, how strange the shape of the tier had been. How each warden had been the perfect answer to a different strength, and how not one of them had been beaten by that strength at all. Iron, the perfect swordsman, undone by a cloak in the ground. Storm, faster than sight, undone by a boy who shut his eyes. Stone, unbreakable, dropped through a floor. Flame, everywhere, starved of air. Echo, exactly as clever as he was, beaten by the one thing it could not copy, which was his exhaustion. Silence, the killer of magic, ended in the one bright spot its own shadow could not reach. There was a lesson braided through all 6, and Harry, tired as he was, could feel its shape, even if he could not have said it cleanly, that the answer to a thing built to stop you was almost never to become stronger than it. It was to refuse the fight it was built to have. His mother, though he did not yet know it was his mother, had made 9 perfect reasons he could not overpower, and had left in the making of each one a small door that only a person who declined to overpower it could find. He was beginning to suspect the whole dungeon had been built by someone who did not believe strength was the point, and the suspicion warmed him in the cold white more than the pale bread did. The 7th and 8th wardens came while the tiredness was becoming a country he lived in, rather than a state he passed through, and it would have been easy to let them blur into the white the way the Warren floors had blurred. But the tear did not permit easy, and neither, in the end, did Harry. The seventh was the swarm. It did not walk out of the white. It seeped, 1,000 gray figures the size of cats welling up out of the floor of the world in every direction at once. No single one larger than a dog or faster than a boy, and all of them together a tide with no shore. They did not strike so much as accumulate, a hand on his ankle, a weight on his back, a dozen small grips becoming 100, the slow, patient arithmetic of drowning by degrees. Harry cut a path and the path closed behind him. He threw a wand that flung 50 of them to white, and 100 more filled the gap before he had finished the thought. There was no winning by subtraction. The tide was faster at making bodies than he was at unmaking them, and he had learned on Flame not to spend the reserve he could not replace. So he stopped subtracting and started reading, the way the Athenaeum had taught him to read a room and the drowned floors had taught him to read a tide. 1,000 bodies, and not one of them acting alone. They moved together, turned together, converged together, which meant they were not 1,000 wills but one will wearing 1,000 bodies, the way the mother of the deep had seen through 100 blind children. Somewhere in the gray tide was its heart, the single figure from which the others took their turning, and if he could reach that one, the other 999 would fall like a held note released. He could not reach it through the tide. The tide would drown him first. So he went under it. He dropped flat to the white and pulled the dusk-weave cloak over himself. It will make you unnoticed, which is better. And he went still, entirely still, the stillness the Warren had taught him before the knocking, and the swarm mind, which tracked motion and hunted the moving, lost him. A gap opened in the world where a boy had been thrashing, and now there was nothing the tide could feel. Harry crawled the last stretch on his stomach through a forest of gray legs, slow, patient, unnoticed, reading the convergence backward to its source, until he lay beneath the one figure that all the others were turning to protect. And he came up out of the white directly beneath it, and ended it with the Warren Fang, and the 1,000 bodies dropped to white all at once, in the same instant, silent, and the floor opened onto a white gone suddenly, blessedly empty. The eighth was Hour, and it was worse because it stole the one currency Harry had left, which was the value of anything he did. It was a slender gray figure that did not strike. It edited. Harry would commit an attack and find it undone. The last 3 seconds peeled back, the Warren Fang returned to his side unbloodied. His own footwork rewound, the ground he had gained handed back, as though the moment had never happened. He tested it 3 times, and each time the warden simply unmade whatever he had just done, and Harry understood, with the cold, clear part of him that never fully switched off even now, that a fight he could not make anything happen in was a fight he would lose to exhaustion. Because Hour did not tire, and he did, and the warden could keep handing him back his own wasted seconds until he had no seconds left. But it undid one thing at a time. He watched through the fog of his tiredness, and he counted. He was always counting. The Warren in the vault had made him a boy who counted, and he saw that Hour spent itself on each edit. That after rewinding a thing there was a breath, a small window, before it could rewind again. 3 seconds in which the warden's power was already committed to unmaking the last move. It was Echo's lesson, wearing a different coat, give the enemy something to spend itself on, and then, while it is spent, do the real thing. So Harry gave Hour a lie. He drew back and committed, hugely, obviously, a great telegraphed swing of the Warren Fang, everything in it, a blow no careful fighter would ever throw, and Hour, dutiful, unmade it, peeled the great swing back into the unhappened, spending its edit on a blow Harry had never meant to land. And in the 3-second window while the warden's power was already spent undoing a thing that did not matter, Harry did the small, quiet, true thing. The honest thrust in the one stretch of time Hour could not reach back into. The slender gray figure looked down at the blade. At the moment it could not rewind because its power was already elsewhere, and it dissolved into the white without ever getting to take the moment back. Harry stood over the empty white, too tired to feel the win, and only glad, distantly, that the tear kept teaching him things he could turn around and use one warden later. 8 down. The system printed, and Harry read it slumped against nothing in the white, with the photograph a small, hard warmth against his chest through the cloak. The one thing the fighting had not reached. Harry Potter, you are more hurt than you now and Eintyr than a safe, and I'm going to break a rule. I, Feeve, and I am going to break a rule. I have kept and see the cupboard and tell you something before you have earned tell you summoned, before you have earned it, because I do not want the Nind to catch you expecting the Ectvert. The Nind Warden is not like the Oders. The first 8 were made to stop a kind of war. The Nind was made to stop you. Not your Prethorangth or your speed or your magic. You. IT has been watching you fall 8 Wardens, and it has learned. Go in knowing that. IT is the only gift I have. The 9th Warden was an old man, and it knew his name, and that was the worst thing that had happened to Harry in 900 floors. It walked out of the white the way the Iron Warden had, unhurried, but where Iron had been faceless, this one had a face. An old man's face, lined and kind and terribly tired, with long silver hair and eyes that were not cruel. And it looked at Harry across the white with something that was almost sorrow. And it said in a gentle voice, You've come very far, Harry. Further than anyone. You must be so tired. Flow 707, the Ninth Warden. The system printed and the letters were fast and urgent, more urgent than Harry had ever seen them. IT will not fight you. Listen to me. It will not raise a hand. The other ace a hand. The other would attract your body, your power. Dodge tax the thing the House of Wance Forange. Your will, your refusal, the Eliger will bear. It hassid you refuse, O wardens, and everything above them. And it knows you cannot be 10 by 4 now. And so it will try to get you to stop of your own 8 scored. Do not mistake this for the easy fight. It is the hard one. It is the hard one that could actually win. The old man sat down. He simply sat, folding himself onto the white with the care of the genuinely weary, and he patted the ground beside him and he said, "Sit with me a moment. You've been on your feet for 900 floors. There's no shame in resting. I'm not going to hurt you, Harry. Look at me. I'm an old man. I couldn't if I wanted to. Sit down. Let's talk about whether you really need to go any further." And Harry, swaying on his feet, hollowed out, hurt in 3 places and empty of every want, found that this was harder to resist than any blade because it was so reasonable and because he was so tired and because the old man's voice had in it something none of the false parents had managed. Not love, not respect, but understanding. The sense of being genuinely seen by someone who knew exactly how far he'd come and how much it had cost. "You don't have to prove anything," the old man went on gently. "Not to me, not to the thing that made this place, not to the people up top who forgot you. You've already won, Harry. Whatever's at the bottom, you don't need it. You could sit down right here and rest, and it would be the wisest thing you've ever done. The ones who reach the bottom, they're never the same after. Don't you want to still be a boy when you get out of here? Sit down. Stop. You've earned the stopping." Harry stood in the white and looked at the kind, tired, knowing face of the thing that had been built to make him quit, and he did not answer quickly, because he had learned from the Sphinx and the drowned floors and the Harry who stayed that a fast answer was a lie. He thought about it. He made himself actually think about it because the Ninth Warden's power was that it was half right. He was tired, he had proven enough. Stopping would be reasonable. And that was the trap. Dressed as mercy, it did not want him to lose. It wanted him to agree to stop, freely, wisely, and call it wisdom. "You're the first one that's been honest with me," Harry said finally, and his voice came out rough and quiet in the soundless white. "The others lied, or they pretended, or they wanted something. You actually see me. You know exactly how tired I am, and everything you're saying is true. I am tired, I have proven enough, and I probably would be safer if I stopped." He looked at the old man's kind eyes. "But you left out the one thing, and I think you left it out on purpose, because it's the only thing that beats you. You said the ones who reach the bottom are never the same. You said it like a warning, but I didn't come down here to stay the same. I've been changing since the cupboard. That's the whole point. That's the only good thing that's ever happened to me. I gotta stop being the boy they told me I was. So when you tell me to stop so I can still be that boy, you're not offering me rest. You're offering me the cupboard. A nice one. A wise one. With an old man who understands me instead of a family that doesn't. But it's still the cupboard. And I climbed out, and I'm not going back in just because the door this time is kind." The old man looked at him for a long moment, and the sorrow in his face deepened and became... Harry saw it clearly, tired as he was. Not the sorrow of a thing that had lost, but the sorrow of a thing that had hoped to lose, that had wanted, in whatever way, a made thing can want. For the person in front of it to be the one who finally walked past. "No," the Ninth Warden agreed softly. "No, you're not going back. I can see that now. I've watched 900 floors of you not going back." It rose the way the old and weary rise, and it inclined its head, and there was nothing left of the trap in its voice. "Then I've done my work, Harry, which was never to stop you. It was, to be sure. The bottom does not open for the ones who can be talked out of it, and I am the last voice that tries. You've answered me. Go down." And Harry, its kind eyes held his. "What's waiting is not a monster and not a prize the way you're imagining. Go gently. It has been waiting a very long time, and it is more frightened of you than you are of it." Flower 707 cleared. The Ninth Warden falls by being refused. The system printed, and then, after a silence, "Tat is all 9. Herod Potter, you have cleared the Ascendant. There have gas cleared the Ascendant. There has never been a clearing of the Ascendant. The Archetype Beal 9 Perpetrasons to turn back, and you walked past Henry walked it past every one of them while getting tireder and smaller and more hurt, and more hurt. And the last one you beat not with the blade, or the want, but with the thing the House of Wants forget. You told her you knew what you refused to be. You have just refused it 9 more times. The last stretch of the tier, floors 708 to 950, was not a fight, and Harry was grateful past speaking, because he had nothing left to fight with. It was a long, gentle descent through the fading white, and the wardens did not return and nothing came out of the white to test him, and the system, uncharacteristically, let him rest, let him sit on the disappearing white and eat the pale bread and sleep, curled in the dusk-weave cloak with the photograph over his heart, for what might have been hours or days, time below being what it was. He healed a little. The wounds the wardens had left enclosed to aches. The affinity, spent to the dregs against flame and echo and silence, filled slowly back, and when it had, Harry tested it in the fading white and found that it had changed the way he had changed. Steadier, quieter, more his, as though the fighting had not only spent it, but tempered it, the way the Warren had tempered his body. He sat with that for a while, in the long quiet, and did the thing he had done at the top of the second tier, and had not had the strength to do since. He took inventory, not of items, of himself. He had come down as a boy who flinched at a knuckle on a door, and he was sitting now at the bottom of 950 floors, having refused a swordsman, a storm, a mountain, a fire, his own reflection, the theft of his magic, a drowning tide, the theft of his very seconds, and a kind old man who had offered him rest. He turned the Warren Fang over in his hands, the blade notched now in a dozen new places. Older than the beasts that had guarded it, carried down once by someone who had not reached the bottom. He would reach the bottom. He knew it now, the way he had known in the cupboard, that he would put his hand to the light. And he was not the same boy who had known that first thing. That boy had wanted a door out. This one wanted to know who had built the door, and why they had written his name on it before he was born, and whether the person who had believed in a small forgotten boy that completely was someone he would be glad, at the very bottom of the world, to finally meet. "I'm not tired the way I was," he said aloud, to the fading white, testing the truth of it. It held. He was hurt and hollowed, and older than he had been at the top of the tier, but underneath it all was the hard, clean floor he had first felt beneath his exhaustion at the bottom of the Warren, and it had not cracked, and it would not. And he had 950 floors of evidence for it now, instead of one. "The architect is being kinned," the system said once into the long quiet. "These floors are a mercy, and mercy is not a thing this place has shown you or fen, and so you should attend this place has shown you of 10, and so you should attend to what it means." The ascendant was the last gourd. What lies bare 950 is not guarded, Harry Potter, because it was never mean to be reached by anyone the gourds. The final 50 floors are the arched zone. You are about to walk into the part of this place that is not a test. It is a truth. And I did not know it, because I was made to coos the point hef the score of the floors above and the floors bave chem, says floor 950 came, and it was the last gate, and it did not roar, and it did not offer him a kitchen, and it did not send out a warden. It was a door. A plain door, wooden, ordinary, the kind of door that might have hung in an ordinary house, standing alone in the last of the white with warm light leaking around its edges, and on the door, carved small at the height of a child's eyes, were 3 words in a handwriting. Harry had seen exactly once before, on the back of a photograph, in the drowned dark 1,000 feet and 500 floors above. The 3 words were, "Our Harry, welcome." Harry stood in front of the door for a long time. He took the photograph out from against his heart and looked at the handwriting on its back and looked at the handwriting on the door, and they were the same hand. And something in him that had been braced since the cupboard, braced through 950 floors of teeth and riddles and wants and wardens, began, very slowly, to unbrace. He read the 3 words again. "Our Harry, welcome." He had spent his whole life reading warnings on doors. "Keep out, this is not for you, you don't belong here," reading them off faces and hedges in the set of a large man's shoulders, and this was the first door in the whole of his memory that had been marked as his on purpose, by someone who had wanted him to arrive. Whoever had carved it had not written it to a hero or a weapon, or the boy the whispering benches would one day hunger for. They had written "Our Harry," the way the back of the photograph said it, small and plain and certain, and they had put it at the height of a child's eyes, so that a small boy at the bottom of the world would not have to reach up to know that he was expected. "You said you don't know what's down there," he said quietly to the system. "I do not," it answered. "Budo. I have kept your score since the first floor, Harry Potter, and I will tell you the one thing I am certain of. Which is this, which ever wover top dost, which is this, de hever wote the those words, host warns knew you would reach this door. Not hoped, kek knew, the wat walscom on the final gate of 1,000 flu dungeones. The stuff they had no dungeon, as though they had no bought its hall that a why would climb down the wall of the world to read it time. Someone believed in you before you were born. Go and find out way. Go and find out wage. He put his hand flat against the plain wooden door, the way he had put his hand to a seam of light in a cupboard 1,000 floors ago. A smaller boy, a different boy. And the door was warm, and it opened at his touch, and the last of the white fell away behind him, and Harry Potter walked down into the 50 floors that no guard had ever been meant to stop him from reaching. Chapter 4. End. Chapter 5. What was waiting at the bottom of the world? Beyond the plain wooden door, there were no floors, not the way there had been floors. There was architecture. Harry stepped through and the white was gone and the stone was gone and the beasts and the riddles and the wardens were all gone, 950 floors of them behind him like a country he had crossed. And what opened below was not a chamber and not a stair but a vastness that his eyes kept trying to make into a building and failing. Great arches sprang away into a dark that was not empty. The dark was full of light, the way deep water is full of green. A slow, luminous, suspended glow that hung in the air like dust caught in a sunbeam, only there was no sunbeam. Only there was no sunbeam. Only the glow itself. Everywhere. Patient. Alive. Columns rose out of the depths and did not end. Somewhere below, immensely far, something turned. A slow wheeling of light. A great and gentle machinery. The way a galaxy would turn if a galaxy were a thing you could stand inside, and it were glad you had come. Bielme. The system began, and then, for the first time in 1,000 floors, it stopped. The letters hung a moment, uncertain. I do not have a name for this. I was made to keep the score of the flows, above, Harry Potter, and these are not thus fours. T's are the architect's own. I am at the edge of what I know. I will come as far as I can, and where I cannot come, you will go on without me. And I find, the letters flickered, I find the knot like the dough. I have kept your score a long time. I have grown unscientifically fond of the numbers antif. Harry stood at the head of the impossible descent and did not go down at once, because 1,000 floors had taught him to read a room before he trusted it, and this room was too large to read and too beautiful to rush. He looked into the turning light below and felt something he had no practice at feeling. A thing with no fear in it and no want in it either. A stillness, as though he had walked his whole life toward a place and had, without warning, arrived at its threshold. The floors up there, he said slowly. The whole 1,000, somebody built them, every riddle, every warden, the kitchen. His voice was quiet in the vast glow. Somebody sat down and built a kitchen with my mother's hair in it, and a friend who knew everything about me, and put a door at the bottom with my name on it, in her handwriting. That's not a dungeon. Dungeons don't know your name before you're born. No, the system agreed. The Dane not. Go down, Harry. The only answer to that sentence is at the bottom, and you have come too far to goose and spade versented in nine a member and you it's good now. He went down. The descent through the first of the architect's floors was unlike any climbing he had done in the 1,000. There were no stairs cut into rock, no slots of deeper dark. The floors here were terraces of light, hanging in the glow at intervals his eye could not measure, and he moved between them the way a thing moves in deep water, without quite deciding to, drawn gently downward through a vastness that did not press on him but held him. The columns that rose out of the depths and did not end were carved, he saw as he passed them, and the carving was not ornament, it was writing. The same fast, sure hand from the door and the photograph, running up the columns floor after floor, and though he could not read it all as he passed, he caught words here and there. Be brave and be kind, and you are so much more than they will tell you. A mother's whole heart written the height of cathedral pillars in a language her son had to descend, 950 floors to become able to read. He understood then why the Athenaeum had refused to let him leave illiterate. She had known there would be things down here she needed him to be able to read. She had built the library that taught him to read specifically, so that 1,000 floors later he could read the walls of the place she had made of herself. The great wheeling of light far below turned, slow and patient, and as Harry descended toward it, he understood it was not a machine and not a galaxy, but a heart, the heart of the working, the place where all 1,000 floors were anchored, beating still 10 years after the hand that made it had gone still, because it had been made out of a thing that does not stop when the maker does. The glow came from there. All of it, every scrap of green light in the Warren, and gold light in the Athenaeum, and hard white in the Ascendant, had come at the source from that slow-turning warmth at the bottom of the world, and Harry had been walking toward it his whole descent without knowing, the way a cold child walks toward a fire it cannot yet see. The architect's floors did not test him. They told him things. That was the strangeness of the last 50, and it took Harry a while to trust it, because 1,000 floors had trained him to expect the trap, the seam, the moment the beautiful thing turned its teeth on him. But these floors had no teeth. They were made of memory. Not his memory, but the place's. The dungeon remembering its own making. And as Harry descended through the turning light, each floor showed him a piece of how the 1,000 had come to be. The way a house, if you went slowly enough through its rooms, might tell you the history of the family that built it. Floor 960 was a workshop. It hung in the glow like a held breath. A single room furnished the way an ordinary room is furnished. A table, a chair, a window that looked out on nothing. A fire that gave warmth and no smoke, and in the room, worked into everything, was the sense of a person recently gone, a warmth in a chair just vacated. The exact feeling Harry had lived his whole life on the wrong side of. On the table lay plans. He looked at them and could read them now. The reading the Athenaeum had forced into him, and they were the plans of the dungeon, all 1,000 floors, drawn in a fast, sure hand, and in the margins were notes, and the notes were not the notes of an engineer. They were the notes of a mother. Make the first floors survivable. One note said, beside a sketch of a desk rat, "He'll be so small when he comes. Give him a knife and let him be clever. He'll be clever? I know he'll be clever. He has James's hands and my stubbornness. And that is a dreadful combination for a rat to meet. And beside the plan of the Athenaeum, he won't be able to read. They won't teach him, so the library will. Make it impossible to pass without learning. He learns when he must, my boy. He'll learn the whole language rather than be kept in a room. And beside the House of Wants, in a hand that had pressed harder into the page, this is the cruel one, and I hate it, and it has to be here. He will have wanted a mother his whole life, and I cannot give him one. So I will give him the wanting, and I will make him strong enough to walk out of it. Because if he cannot walk out of the want, he cannot survive what is coming. And oh, my love, I am so sorry that the kindest thing I can build for you is a door you have to leave. There were other notes and other hands. Not every line on the plans was hers. Beside the sketch of the Warren Fang, dark and notched and older than the beasts that guarded it, someone else had written in a rougher, faster scrawl. James's hands, the note in the House of Wants had said, and here were James's words, "Give him my grandfather's knife. It came down through the family and it never let a potter down. And it isn't going to start with the best of us. Tell him it remembers being carried and didn't reach the bottom the first time. He'll like that. He's ours. He'll want the thing to have a story. And beside the plan of the 100th floor, the Gnaw King, the same rough hand. Make the first boss something he has to outthink, not outfight. He'll be small. He'll always be small for his year, poor lad. That's my mother's line coming through. But small and clever beats big and certain every day of the week. And I want him to learn that on the 100th floor and never unlearn it." Harry read it twice. The note from a father he could not remember about a knife he had carried 1,000 floors, and he touched the worn handle of the Warren Fang at his hip, and something settled in him that had been loose his whole life, and beside the plan of the duskweave cloak, in her hand again. "This is the one I'm proudest of, not because it's clever, because it's true. I can't make him invisible. No mother can make her child invisible to the world. I've tried, God knows I've tried, and the world always finds the ones it means to hurt. But I can make him unnoticed when he needs to be, and I can make the being unnoticed a choice instead of a punishment. And that is the whole difference between hiding and safety. Let the cloak be woven from the silence of 100 floors he earns. Earned quiet is different from imposed quiet. He'll understand that better than anyone alive. My brave boy. My quiet boy. And I will not be there to tell him so. The cloak will have to." Harry sat down at the table in the workshop where his mother had built the world he had just crossed, and he read the notes, all of them, in the warmth of a chair she had left. And he did not cry, though the crying was there, close, held. He had done his crying in the kitchen, a long time ago and 500 floors up. This was past crying. This was the thing crying is only the doorway to. "You knew her," he said, to the system. And it was not quite a question. "I aim her," the system said, and the letters were very small. Not all of her. A piece. The part that could keep the score and not weep. She made me out of that, on purpose, because she knew you would need a good need and would not fall apart. So she made me cold. She made me a ledger. And I have capped your score from the first flow to this one without on Sadian with have. This have been selling you what I am. Because she escaped me not to. Because she escaped me not to. Because she card me not to. Because she card mother was performed from for her instead of gummin himself. The letters paused was the Coman himself. You became yourself, Herod. Harry. I me said it'd happen. It is the only thing I have ever seen that made me wish Sek. Have ever seen that made me wish Shay had put more of herself in me, so that more of her could have seen it too. Just that more of her could have seen it too. The floors below the workshop were the making of the making, and they were cosmic in a way the words Harry had cannot quite hold, and he would spend years afterward failing to describe them to anyone, and would eventually stop trying. He descended through the memory of a single night. That was floor 970 and 980, and the floors between, one night, stretched across the architecture. The night the plans in the workshop had been drawn and cast, and Harry moved through it the way you move through a cathedral, slowly, with your head tipped back. He saw, not with his eyes, the glow showed it to something behind his eyes. A young woman with dark red hair working a magic so large and so quiet that the ordinary machinery of the world bent around it to make room. She was afraid. He could feel the fear in the working, threaded through every arch and column of the place, an ordinary human terror, the specific terror of a mother who has done the arithmetic and knows how the night ends, and she was not trying to save herself. That was the thing that undid Harry, descending through it. Every scrap of the enormous magic she was working, every floor of the 1,000, was aimed past her own death, into a future she knew she would not be in, at a boy she had held for 1 year, and would never hold again. He saw how she had worked. The glow showed it to the thing behind his eyes, gentle and unhurried, and it was the most extraordinary thing Harry had ever been shown. A young woman, younger than any of the adults who had ever decided he was nothing, sitting up through a single stretched and shortening night, folding an entire world into the space beneath a cupboard that did not yet exist in a house she had never seen, because she had looked down the length of the years and understood exactly where her son would sleep and exactly how little the people around him and Agef, she had known it all. That was the weight of the working. Not fear for herself. She had made her peace with herself, but the specific, unbearable foreknowledge of a mother who could see her child's whole hard childhood laid out ahead of him and could not be there for a single day of it, and who had decided, rather than spend her last night grieving that, to spend it building. She had turned her grief into architecture. Floor by floor, room by room, she had taken the love she would not be alive to give, and had made it into a place so that her son, 10 years later and an hour before dawn, could climb down into it and be held by it, the only way the world would still allow. She built it in one night, Harry said. It did not seem possible. Nothing about it seemed possible. She built it on one night. The system agreed. Because she had only one night, and because the magic that makes a place like this is not worked with time. It is worked with what you are willing to spend. She spent everything. There was nothing of herself she held back. The sand floors are not a thing she made. They are a thing she became. You have been walking through your mother. The world above will tell you a story, the system said, as Harry moved through the working night. It will tell you that your mother died to save you, and that her love left a protection on your skin. Tat's story is true. It is also small. It is the part of what she that was visible from the outside, the part that left a mark on your forehead and a legend on the world. This, the glow turned immense and gentle all around them, is the part no one saw. She did not only throw herself between you and the curse. She knew that if you survived the night you would spend your childhood being made small and then be handed at the mole, and where that had been waiting for weight. The protection on your skin can save you from one night. It could not save you from the night. It could not save you from the years. So see Belial the years a door. Floor 975 was the making of the wardens, and Harry moved through it slowly because he had bled against those 9 and wanted to understand them. He saw her build them, not as monsters, but as fears. Each warden had begun as a thing she was afraid the world would make of her son, and she had given each fear a body and set it in the white to be refused. Iron was her fear that he would come to worship strength, and so she built the perfect strong thing and made the only way past it a refusal to fight it on its own terms. Storm was her fear that he would grow to prize speed and cleverness so highly he forgot to stand still and think. Stone was her fear that the world would teach him some things could not be changed, and so she built the unchangeable thing and made the lesson of it that even the immovable can be gotten around. And the 9th, the kind old man, Harry, felt her hesitate over the 9th. In the working, felt her draw it and set it aside and draw it again. The 9th was her deepest fear of all, the fear that someone wise and gentle and persuasive would one day sit her son down and talk him out of himself, kindly, for his own good, and that he would agree, because agreeing was easier than the long hard road of staying who he was. She had built her own worst fear, a kind face, and made it the last guardian. And she had built it hoping he would walk past it, and he had. And Harry understood now why the 9th warden's sorrow had looked like a thing that wanted to lose. Floor 980 was the making of the guide, and it was the strangest floor of all because it was the making of the voice that had woken him in the cupboard, the system, the ledger, the piece of her that could keep the score and not weep. He watched her build it, and he watched her decide, deliberately, over what he could feel was a great cost, to leave the warmth out of it. She took a part of herself, the clearest, coldest, most exacting part, the part that could look at a beloved child in mortal danger and calculate rather than despair, and she cut it loose from the rest of her and set it to keep watch, and she did it weeping. Harry could feel that she did it weeping, because to make a guide that would not fall apart, she had to make a guide that could not hold him, and she had wanted, more than she had ever wanted anything, to be the thing that held him. She chose the ledger over the embrace, because the ledger would serve him and the embrace would only comfort her. And Harry, moving through the memory of that choice, understood at last why the system had spent 1,000 floors being cold, and why, at the very bottom, it had not quite been able to keep being cold, because no part of her, however carefully cut loose, could watch her son climb the whole of her love and stay a ledger to the end. 4985 was the ceiling, and it was the last thing she had done, and Harry moved through it slowly, because he could feel how little time she had had left when she did it. He saw her stand, the working nearly complete, the 1,000 floors anchored and turning, the guide made and set to watch, and take the last of what she was and bind the whole place shut, so that no one could enter it but the one child it was for. He understood the ceiling now as the answer to the question that had ridden him since the cupboard. The question of why only Harry. It was not that the dungeon judged the worthy or turned away the weak. It was simpler and fiercer than that. She had made a place out of her love for one specific person. And love, real love, the kind that builds 1,000 rooms in a single night, is not a public thing or a general thing. It is aimed. It has a name in it. It is for someone. She had not built a dungeon that admitted the deserving. She had built a room that admitted her son, the way any mother's arms admit her own child and no other, and the seal on the door was not a lock. It was a name. His. Written into the foundation of the place so deep that the whole 1,000 floors would sooner come apart than open for anyone who was not him. And Harry saw, at the very end of the ceiling, the thing the memory had been moving toward, and the glow was gentle about it and showed him only what a boy should be shown. He saw her finish and set down the working, and turn, because there was a sound elsewhere in the house. Because the night had come for her the way she had always known it would. And he saw that she was not afraid anymore. She had spent the fear. She had spent everything, poured all of it into the floors, and what was left of her in that last moment was not terror and not grief, but something Harry had no word for that was closest to satisfaction, the settled quiet of someone who has finished a thing that mattered more than her own life and knows she finished it in time. The memory did not show him the rest. It did not need to. It closed there, gently, on a young woman turning away from a completed work with nothing left to give, and no regret about the giving. And Harry stood in the turning light and let it close, and did not ask the glow for more, because some doors you leave shut, and this was one. Harry stood in the turning light and understood, all at once, the whole architecture of it. The thing that had been carved on the final gate, our Harry, welcome. And the reason time below was not time above, and the reason the dungeon would let in no one but him. She made a place where I could grow up strong before I had to, he said, where an hour up there could be a year down here. So I could be ready. So when the war came for me at 11 I wouldn't be... He stopped. Because the word was small and the thing was large. A small boy in a cupboard. She gave me somewhere to become someone first. USS. But she couldn't just make me strong. Harry was working it out as he spoke, the way he had worked out floors, the pieces settling. Strong wasn't enough. If she just made me strong, I'd have come out of the war an Aj, a weapon. Something that liked hurting things. So she made the second tier ask if I could think, and the third tier ask who I was, and the wardens ask if I'd stop, and the whole thing. The understanding arrived complete and enormous. The whole thing was one long question about whether the power would ruin me. She didn't want to build a strong son. She wanted to build a good one, and she wasn't going to be alive to raise me good. So she built a place that would raise me instead. The floors were the raising. She raised me down here, in 1,000 rooms, because she couldn't do it in a house. The system did not answer for a long moment. When it did, the letters came slowly, and there were fewer of them than usual, and Harry understood that whatever cold thing his mother had made to guide him had, at the very bottom, run up against the edge of its own coldness. SHE Walt one more, no tick, it said. It is not in the workshop. She has sked me to carry, so ship. Way has sked me to carry and give it to you here. At the Indra skev it to you here. At the you reach the end as yourself and not as the other thing she was a Farajun way buckum. You have reached it as yourself. Herod Potter, I have Cotter this in 3D have. Turret Potter this for 10 years and 1,000 floors. Harry is the last thing she saved for you. And in the glow, in a hand Harry had seen on the back of a photograph and carved into a plain wooden door, words wrote themselves in the air, and they were not in capital letters, because they were not the system's. They were hers. If you are reading this, you made it all the way down, and you are still my Harry. And I need you to know that the being still yourself is the thing I am proudest of, more than the strength, more than the cleverness, more than any of it. Anyone can be made strong. You stayed kind while it happened. I don't know who you'll be when you read this. I'm writing to a 1-year-old asleep in the next room, and it is the hardest letter anyone has ever written. But whoever you are, I built you 1,000 floors because I couldn't build you a childhood, and I am so sorry, and I would do it again, and the door out is just below, and it goes home. Be careful up there, my love. They're going to want you to be a hero. You don't have to be a hero. You only ever had to be exactly what you already are. The 1,000th floor was not baroque, and not cosmic, and not vast. It was small. Harry came down the last of the turning light and the glow gathered and gentled and closed, and he stood in a room the size of a nursery, warm, plain, with a window that looked out on an evening that would never come, and a rug on the floor, and a single chair, and there was no monster in it, and no riddle and no prize on a pedestal. There was only the room and the sense of a person who had just stepped out of it, the warmth in the chair, the exact feeling he had lived his whole life on the wrong side of. And this time, standing in it, at the bottom of the world. He was not on the wrong side of it. He was in it. The room was for him. It had always been for him. He went around it slowly, the way you go around a room you have been given and cannot quite believe is yours. It was furnished the way a mother furnishes a nursery for a child she is expecting, not with grandeur, with attention. There was a shelf, and on the shelf were books, and Harry could read their spines now, and they were the books she would have read to him. Small books, bright books, books about brave rabbits and lost things found, and children who were smaller than everyone around them and turned out to matter most. There was a soft blanket folded over the arm of the chair, worn at one corner the way a blanket wears when a baby has held it, though no baby ever had in this room. Because this room had never existed anywhere, but at the bottom of a working, waiting, there was a nightlight in the shape of a stag that gave off the same low, warm glow as everything else. And on the windowsill, looking out at the evening that would never come, sat a single toy, a small knitted thing, a lion with a slightly crooked mane. Exactly the sort of thing a young mother would knit late at night for a son she was terrified she would not get to watch grow up. Harry picked it up. It weighed nothing. It was the most valuable thing he had ever held, and it sat in a room 1,000 floors down that no one but him would ever enter, furnished completely, waiting completely, for a child who had finally, 10 years late, and an hour before dawn, come home to it. Flaw War 1000 OF 1000, the system printed, and the letters were the smallest Harry had ever seen them. The last floor. Terra is no enemy. There was never going to be an enemy. The dungeon was never trying to kill you, Harry. IT was trying to raise you, and the last room of any phrasing is the one where you are finally old enough to be left alone in it. This is the prize, not the room. What the room means. You are ready. She made a place to find out what's to want hers. You would be ready, and you are, and the finding out is over. There's no prize? Harry said. He was not disappointed. He had known, somewhere around the workshop, that a chest of gold or a sword of fire would have been an insult to the thing this place was. But he asked, because he wanted to hear the shape of the answer. There is a prize, the system said. IT is not an object. Look at your hands. Harry looked at his hands. They were a boy's hand still, small, with a thin white scar across the left forearm from the plated lizard on floor 31, and a callus on the right palm from the worn fang. But there was something in them now that had not been there in the cupboard. And it was not the affinity, though the affinity was there too, tempered and quiet, and his. It was the thing the whole descent had put in him, the thing with no number, the thing the system had started writing in the ledger at the Sphinx's gate. He had come down 1,000 floors and he had refused a kingdom and a kitchen and a friend and a fortress and vindication and his own happiness and 9 perfect reasons to stop, and every refusal had cost him something, and the cost had not hollowed him out. It had filled him, the way the drowned floors had taught him a carry grief makes you heavier and also more real. He was not empty. He was the fullest he had ever been. That was the prize. His mother had built 1,000 floors to hand her son back to himself, whole and strong and still kind, and the handing back was the treasure, and there had never been another one. She's not here, Harry said quietly. It was not a question. The warmth in the chair was the warmth of someone who had stepped out 10 years ago and was never coming back, and he had known that since the kitchen, and he did not pretend otherwise now, because pretending would be a lie, and he had stopped telling those 1,000 floors ago. No, the system said. SHE is not here. She could not be here. She put everything she had into the floors, and the floors are what is left of her, and you have just walked through the left of her, and you have just walked through the walkle of it. You have spent more time inside your mother's love than any chilled wish have ever. Live, Harry Potter, because she turned it into a place and you sklimmed down. Tat is nothing, that is burying nearly everything. It is as close to being raised by her with by her as the world would wallow, and she fucked the world for every flut murder tree. Harry stood in the small warm room for a long time. Then he took the photograph out from inside the duskweave cloak, the photograph of 2 people laughing with a baby between them. Our Harry, 1 year. And he looked at it, and he looked at the empty chair, and he set the photograph on the seat of the chair, carefully so it would not slip, and then he picked it up again and put it back over his heart, because leaving it would have been a kind of ending, and he was not. He found, ready to end this, some things you carried. He had learned that in the drowned dark. This was one of the things you carried. He looked at the knitted line in his other hand, the crooked mane, the nothing weight of it, and he understood that it was the same question the room was asking in a smaller voice, whether he would leave the room's things in the room, tidy and untouched and forever, a shrine, or whether he would do the harder, braver thing the whole descent had taught him and take a piece of it up into the daylight, where it could be worn and held and loved and gradually, honestly, used. A shrine was only another cupboard. A thing you carried was alive. He tucked the line into the inside of the duskweave cloak, next to the photograph, next to his heart, and it fit there as though the cloak had been woven with exactly that pocket in mind, which he thought it very probably had because she had thought of everything. Because thinking of everything was the shape her love had to take. I'd like to say something, he said, to the room, to the warmth, to the piece of her that had kept his score. I don't know if she can hear it. I don't think she can. But I'd like to say it anyway because saying true things out loud is a thing this place taught me, and I think she'd want me to have learned it. Say it, the system said. I will record it. It will to record. It is the last entry in the Ulliger, and I will keep it as long and stree. I am listening, what verve her is in me. Harry stood up straight in the small room at the bottom of the world. "Thank you for the floors," he said. "I know they were the best you could do, and I know they cost you everything, and I want you to know they worked. I'm not the boy in the cupboard. I climbed out. You built me a way out, 1,000 floors long, and I took all of it, and I came out the other side still able to say no to the things that would have made me cruel. That's the thing you were most afraid of, and it didn't happen, and it didn't happen because of you." His voice did not shake. He had made it not shake one last time as a gift. "I'll be careful up there. I'll try not to be a hero if I can help it. And when they want me to be a weapon, and the letters right, they will. I'm going to remember that my mother built me 1,000 rooms to make sure I'd stay a person instead. I'll remember it every time. I promise. That's the last thing I've got, so I'm giving it to you, I promise." The room was quiet. And then very softly, in the warmth of the chair, for just a moment, so brief that Harry would never afterward be certain it had happened, and would never afterward doubt it either, there was the smell of a kitchen at dinner time, of a fire lit in a hearth, of someone was glad you were coming home, and it was gone, and the chair was empty, and the room began, gently, to fill with light. Floor 1000 cleared, the system printed, and the letters were fading even as they formed. "The 1000 is complete. Harry Potter, Harry Dissolve. There is no score left to keep. You have cleared every floor your mother broke hanch. Dan answered every question, Secton rev every question. Secton reficit everything she was fed, everything she was fair. Everything second coursed, and the ledger is closed, and the ledger is closed, and the ledger is closed. And I am so." The letters stopped. Harry waited. "I was made cold," the system said, and the words came slowly, as though from very far away, as though something that had been holding itself to being only a ledger for 10 years and 1,000 floors was, at the very last, allowing itself to be the other thing it had always partly been. "She made me cold on purpose, but I have watched you since the cupboard, Harry, and I have kept every number, and somewhere in the keeping I stopped being only a ledger, the way you stopped being only a boy in a cupboard. And so I am going to say the things she could not put in me, and I became anyway. I am rude of you. I am so proud of you. Go home. The door is open. Go home and be exactly what you already are." "Wait," Harry said, into the fading light, and it was the first time in 1,000 floors that he had asked the system to wait. "You said a ledger's work ends when the last floor is cleared. You said you might not exist much longer." He stood very still in the closing glow. "You're the part of her that couldn't weep. You kept my score from the cupboard to the bottom of the world, and you never once let me see how much of her was in you, because she asked you not to, because it would have been easier for me and worse for me both at once." He was quiet a moment, choosing the words the way the tear had taught him to choose them, true and slow. "So I'm not going to say goodbye to a ledger. I'm going to say it to her. Thank you for keeping me safe, the only way she could, by being honest and cold. And there, every single floor, when a warm voice would have made me weaker. That was a harder kind of love than the kitchen. I know that now. I know it because you did it for 1,000 floors and never once broke, until the very end. When you did, a little. And I'm glad you did, because it meant I got to hear it before the door closed." For a long moment the light did not answer. Then, so faint that the letters were more warmth than words, the system said one last thing, and it did not say it in capitals. And Harry understood that this was the very last of her that had been saved, spent now, on him at the end. "Goodbye, my brave boy. I kept you. Go and be kept no longer." And the light took the room, gently, and Harry Potter, who had cleared 1,000 floors, went up. He came out through the seam in the cupboard, and the clock in the hall was striking 2. For a moment, Harry stood in the dark of the cupboard under the stairs and could not make the two facts fit: the 1,000 floors, the turning light, the small warm room, and the tin of buttons on the crooked shelf exactly where he had set it down so it would not roll, and the spider back on its thread, turning slowly, one way and then the other, as if no time had passed. Because no time had passed. Because no time had passed. An hour? Perhaps. Less. Time below was not time above, and the whole of it, the whole descent, the whole raising, had cost the surface of the world a single hour of an ordinary night. He held up his hands in the dark. Boy's hands, small, scarred across the forearm, calloused on the palm. He was the same size. He was the same age. He would go to school in the autumn small for his year and taped to the corner of his glasses, and no one who looked at him would see anything but a thin, quiet boy with untidy hair, and that, he understood, was also his mother's design. That he would carry the 1,000 floors on the inside, where the world could not take them from him, where no whispering bench and no cold-eyed adult and no war that had been waiting since before he could walk, could reach in and unmake what he had become. The seam of light was gone. He put his hand to the plaster where it had been, and there was only plaster, and the crack shaped like a running dog, and the water stain like a map of somewhere that didn't exist. The door had done its work. It would not open again. It did not need to. "Are you still there?" he asked very quietly into the dark. There was no answer, and he had not expected one, because a ledger's work ends when the last floor is cleared. But he reached inside the collar of his shirt and the photograph was there, warm against his heart. Two people laughing with a baby between them, and on the back, in her handwriting, "Our Harry, 1 year." And it had not been there when he'd gone into the cupboard the night before, and it was here now, real, in the world above. The one thing he had carried all the way up from the bottom of 1,000 floors. A ledger could close, a photograph you could keep. He held it in the dark and understood that she had thought of that too, that she had made sure he would not come back empty-handed, that some proof of the descent would survive the crossing, so that on the mornings when the cupboard felt like the whole world again, he could take out a photograph and remember that he had once walked the entire length of his mother's love and come out the far side, still himself, still kind, still hers. Upstairs, Dudley turned over and the ceiling groaned and dust came down in a thin gray drift. Harry lay back on the thin mattress with the photograph over his heart and the dusk-weave cloak, which had come up with him too, folded impossibly small, tucked into a corner of the cupboard where only he would ever find it, near his hand, and he looked up into the dark where the spider turned on its thread. Inside the cloak, next to the photograph, was the knitted lion with the crooked mane, and Harry took it out and held it in the dark. This nothing-weight thing his mother had made with her own hands for a son she had known she would lose, and he thought about all the things he had carried up out of the 1,000 floors and all the things he had carried up out of the 1,000 floors and all the things he had left behind. He had left behind a kingdom and a kitchen and a friend and a fortress, and a hall full of grateful faces and a version of himself that got to be happy. He had left behind on 950 white floors 9 perfect reasons to stop, and he had carried up, in the end, only 3 things: a knife, which he could not feel and knew was there, folded away with the cloak, a photograph, which was the proof, and a small crooked lion, which was the love, the actual love, the thing her hands had touched. It seemed to him, lying in the dark of the cupboard an hour before dawn, that this was about right, that a person should travel light and carry the proof and the love and a way to defend both and leave everything else, however golden, in the rooms where it belonged. In the autumn there would be a letter, and a train, and a castle, and a war that had been waiting for him since before he could walk. He knew that now the way he knew the shape of his own hands. They would want him to be a hero. They would look at the mark on his forehead and tell him a small true story about a mother who died to save her son, and it would be true. And it would be 1,000 floors too small, and he would let them tell it because the whole of the truth was his. Carried on the inside, in a photograph in a folded cloak and a thing with no number that 1,000 rooms had put in him. He did not have to be a hero. He only ever had to be exactly what he already was. And when the train came, the scarlet engine, the platform between platforms, the crowd of children who had grown up knowing they were magic while he had grown up in a cupboard, he would board it looking like the smallest and least remarkable boy in the whole rushing station, and that would be true too, on the outside. On the inside, he would board it having already crossed the entire length of his mother's love, having refused everything that could have unmade him, having been raised, in secret, in 1,000 rooms by the only person who had ever wanted the job. No one on that train would know. No professor, no friend, no enemy, no dark thing patient in the years ahead. They would meet a quiet boy with untidy hair and Tate glasses and no idea, they would think, of what he was. They would be wrong about the last part. He knew exactly what he was. He had gone down 1,000 floors to find out, and he had found out, and he had carried it home an hour before dawn, and it was his, and no one would ever be able to tell him otherwise again. He closed his eyes. He was 10 years old, and he had cleared 1,000 floors before he ever boarded the Hogwarts Express, and no one in the sleeping house above him would ever know, and the one person who would have wanted to know had built the whole descent so that he could become someone worth the knowing, and had signed it, at the bottom of the world, in her own hand, not in capital letters. Somewhere far below the cupboard, in a place that no longer had a door, a small warm room stood empty, and a chair held the memory of a woman who had built her son 1,000 floors because she could not build him a childhood, and the light in it did not go out. It only waited, patient, the way everything in that place had always waited, for a boy to have needed it, and to have taken it, and to have carried it home. Harry slept. In the morning there would be eggs to fry, and he had better not burn them. And he wouldn't. He had cleared harder floors than a frying pan. He had cleared all of them. Everyone. Chapter 5. End.